The Corte Madera Town Council is in session. The meeting is for Tuesday, October 1, 2019. Town Clerk, will you please call roll?
Councilmember Bailey.
Here.
Councilmember Beckman. Absent. Councilmember Kuhnhart.
Here.
Vice. Wait,
Let's start
Can
over.
we start over? Thank you. Councilmember Bailey.
Still here.
Councilmember Kuhnhart.
Still here.
Councilmember Ravazio.
Now I'm here.
Vice Mayor Beckman is absent. Mayor Andrews.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay. Will you please join me for our Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the first item is open time. That is set aside for people to speak on any issue that's not otherwise on the agenda. You'll have 3 minutes.
Hi, Pat Ravazio, 427 Oakdale Avenue. Just a quickie, I know you have a big agenda tonight, but I believe the city of Palo Alto and Menlo Park are joining Berkeley in becoming the first cities to set up a building code that does not allow new gas infrastructure. So an all-electric grid allows us to, especially in Marin, to use almost all solar to power our homes, and by reducing our dependency on natural gas, we can really do a bigger part of the share to reduce emissions, methane, all of the things, earthquakes, aquifer pollutants. We can do a lot to do our share, and I'd like to see Corte Madera really be a leader and jump on board with some of these more progressive cities so that we can look like a leader too, and we can actually be a leader. Thank you.
Okay. The next item is the consent calendar. The consent calendar is designed for routine items or items that have been previously discussed and do not require further discussion. They will be approved by a single motion. Any member of the town council, staff, or public may request removal of an item for discussion. And I'd like item 4D to be pulled for discussion. And that's basically, Rebecca, did that come through the League of Cities, that suggested letter?
Thank you, Mayor Andrews. No, the request did not come from the League of California Cities. It came from the group, the Elected Officials to Protect California, of which there were 2 council members. I know one was from the city of Culver City that was chairing it, and it was their staff that was calling the cities to ask for support and signatures on that letter.
Okay. Would any members of the public like to comment on it? Council members? Go for it.
I like that letter, which asks for us to start eliminating fossil fuels, a recently commented upon topic from the public, unanticipated, in connection with this letter. But this is a future direction. There's no specific action called for. I think it says, Mr. Governor, would you set the goals and set the policies, not unlike what the last governor has previously adopted. And I think that we should feel free to sign on and say this is what our future looks like. It doesn't, I think the one complaint that I might have is that it seems to say that state government action about changing drilling and fracking could precede individual action. I think individual action has to go side by side or in fact precede. I, for one, just installed an all-electric induction cooktop instead of gas in our kitchen to eliminate that interior pollution. So I like the letter.
Good. Any members, you want to comment on it?
Yeah, I have a comment.
Okay.
I don't have a problem with the letter. I have a problem with the fact that we are trying to approve a letter that is coming from an outside source, which opens us up to, I mean, when I was mayor, I was getting 3 letters a day from various outside groups. We have a staff member who has to evaluate every single one of these. They have to write a report. It takes their time. We have a very full agenda tonight. We're already spent 5 minutes talking about this. And we have council members on the League of Cities and a council member on the Legislative Committee who does a great job of evaluating letters and positions and tells us whether or not we should be taking positions on stuff. And I think we should restrict our time and our consent calendar items or business items to letters that come through those 2 sources. I will vote for this tonight so we can move on, but in general, I think this is bad policy to be taking letters like this from outside sources because we are not in the business of endorsing outside ideas.
Okay. Anyone else?
Did you ask for public comment?
No, I was going to do that next. Okay.
Oh, I thought you already had public comment.
I'm going to let you ask questions. Any
Oh.
public comment on it? Okay. No? Somebody want to make a motion?
I will make one comment, which I agree with Bob in all respects, especially to point out that our member on the Legislative Committee is kind of excellent. So, and I will move that we approve consent items 4A through 4E.
Second. But by the way, the inside joke is that Mr. Bailey is our representative on.
Councilmember Bailey?
Yes.
Councilmember Kuhnhard?
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Beckman? Mayor Andrews?
Yes. Okay.
I do agree, Bob.
And it was pointed out to me that I was supposed to report out on the closed session from September 17th, and there was no reportable action taken. But if you want to hint at what went on, look at 60. So, okay, next item is first reading and possible introduction of ordinance 989, an ordinance of the Town Council repealing and replacing Chapter 936 of the Municipal Code to update and clarify regulation of excessive and offensive noise.
Thank you,
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This is not a new issue for our community. It is one of our #1 quality of life issues that we have in town presently, and it's not an easy issue to fix. One of the issues that we've talked about over the course of the years is that our current noise ordinance is subjective and it needs to be objective. There's certain sections within it and most jurisdictions that surround us where many sections are unenforceable. And we're really working with our community over the last few years, doing surveys, just one-on-one conversation, group conversations. Every neighborhood is a little bit different. And on any one of these items that we're going to discuss tonight, in some instances, the community is split. So instead of having another discussion about the noise ordinance, staff heard the community loudly and basically came back with the first reading of this ordinance. What I'll say is that I'll challenge staff and the community and council to problem solve a little bit during this meeting. Staff tried to land in the middle on any given item the best we could. And as we go through this, there'll be some sections that we want to bring to your attention, and you'll hear from residents tonight, and you may even your own feelings about it, of some changes and tweaks that we have to make to this. But we really wanted to give you a thoughtful foundation to really consider and set you up for success in your decision-making tonight. And so I hope you agree. It's going to be a team effort. It starts with our town attorney, Teresa Stricker. You have our planning and building director, Adam Wolf. And you have our new code enforcement officer, Mike Moriarty. Mike Moriarty also worked for Twin Cities Police and Marin County Sheriff's Office for a number of years, and we were lucky enough to bring him over here as a code enforcement officer. And he's just been really outstanding, and he has good perspective for us tonight. Central Marin Police Authority is not here, but every step of the way we have heavily relied on them for their feedback and input, and so we believe between Michael and I that we can share that should you have any questions from a police perspective. Again, some of the highlights in the staff report. of changes that we really focused on. Again, trying to make our ordinance objective factors so we can easily go out there. The residents can understand what the ordinance is, and our officers and code enforcement can enforce it. The second thing is we want to, when at all possible, mirror the agencies of San Anselmo and Larkspur within the Central Marin Police Authority jurisdiction when at all possible. You'll know that both San Anselmo and Larkspur recently made changes to their leaf blower ordinance, but they didn't touch major sections of their noise ordinance. The same issues that we have within our ordinance currently, that was passed in the early 60s, 70s, they have the same issues. And talking to those managers, they're really looking to us tonight and over the next meeting or so on any changes we make to consider mirroring what we do. So we're going to take a little bit of a leadership role here of trying to reset our noise ordinance.
So can I just ask a quick question? So Larkspur is considering mirroring the ordinance that you're proposing tonight?
Major portions, that's correct, or having a public discussion about it, yes.
Okay, thank you.
The second, or next point that we have, as well as Larkspur, is that our noise ordinance is a misdemeanor if you violate it. So think about that for a second. If you violate the noise ordinance, you're using, right now, a leaf blower outside of the hours that we allow. It's technically, could be, go ahead.
The current ordinance does allow for a misdemeanor, except as to the leaf blowers.
Oh,
Leaf
sorry,
blowers
leaf blowers.
are an infraction, but every other component of the current noise ordinance, a violation is a misdemeanor, which is at least a potential for jail time for a misdemeanor.
Thank you for that. Excuse my wing person on making mistakes. But the point is, the noise ordinance absolutely should be an infraction, and it's heavy-handed and it's very difficult to enforce. The next piece, the leaf blower, you'll see leaf blower changes. In that situation, we thought there was a very thoughtful process in Larkspur, great community participation from both the commercial businesses and residents. And where they landed ultimately, we have very similarities to them, and so we did attempt to mirror exactly what Larkspur passed. So what you'll see here mirrors Larkspur. And again, some key components of that are we are banning gas-powered leaf blowers. We're allowing electric leaf blowers within certain hours. We're also making exceptions for commercial businesses, and we can go through those sections.
Can I say, we're allowing electric that comply with the noise ordinance?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
Within hours.
So the way that the proposed ordinance is written, the leaf blowers do not have to comply with the decibel readings. They are their own separate, regulated separately and based on type of leaf blower as well as time of day and day of the week.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's what I understood your question to be, within certain time restrictions per the ordinance.
Okay.
And again, we'll go through this. I just want to highlight some changes. And again, commercial businesses, yes, commercial businesses are allowed to use leaf blowers. One of the two things that really jump out outside of the leaf blower, because I think leaf blowers have been a big conversation for our community. Again, we landed in the middle, and we recognize that as staff. We're not strongly providing a recommendation for the council that you need to land where we ultimately started this conversation. But again, we thought it was important in hearing public feedback. We've had a number of meetings about this. We felt it appropriate, based on the thoughtful discussion of Larkspur, to start where they landed. We thought that was a really good process. The other one is mechanical noise. And so we had some thoughtful comments. Again, this ordinance went out well in advance so people in our community could read it. I'll give Peter Hensel credit, and I think his staff, or the council, has seen his email, and it's also in the back of the room for the community. He focused on some of his frustrations of how we handled mechanical noise specific to the ordinance. One of the issues in our current ordinance, we don't speak to ambient noise, and ambient noise is really important. And so right now, if you're in a certain zoning area and it's a certain decibel, over a certain decibel reading, it could be 40, 50, or 60. And I'll give you, as we talk about this, kind of just an average noise level chart. Anything over that, technically, within the ordinance could be a violation, and it doesn't speak to ambient noise. And what you'll see What you'll see in our community as we start to talk about examples, there's many times that our ambient noise could be 20 decibels over what our noise ordinance is. As an example, an air conditioning unit on average is about 60 decibels. So if you look in our residential areas and you look at our current ordinance, it's in the 40 to 50 range. And so right now, every pool pump, every air conditioning unit, anything mechanical is going to be in violation technically of our current noise ordinance. That's a problem. On average, if you look in a residential area that is kind of set back in our neighborhoods, set back, and you're talking about 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., the average ambient noise could be anywhere from 30 to 50. It just depends. As you start to get closer to Tamalpais, Casa Buena, Tamal Vista, Paradise Drive, the highway, it could be anywhere from 50 to 65. We did Adam brought it to my attention earlier. We did within our general plan, it's an old analysis. It was in 2009, but I would argue that we really haven't changed. I think if anything, technology's gotten a little bit better with motors. But they did a study where they separated residential units close to the highway. The range would be 60 to 65 decibels. Back away from the highway, it would be 45 to 50. That was the range. And so staff really looked at that. We considered it. We landed as a starting point. It's on page 5 of your staff report. We kind of go over, and I think this is to Peter's comment and some other residents, and I think it's good for our conversation tonight of where we ultimately land. But what we did is we started with, in certain areas, you can see where if it's above a certain amount, above the ambient noise, you're in violation. And so then you can go to the chart and you can start to see what those differences are. I mean, if you have a conversation, right now, I'll give you a couple examples of decibel readings. I was standing in front of Town Hall, so this is the middle of the day. It was anywhere from 65 to 87 was the average, right? But it's a busy street. I went into my office and I closed the doors and we sat there and it was 55. We started a conversation and we were about 60 to 65 in our conversation. So it starts to give you an idea of, like, when you're talking about numbers, it's easy to get worked up about these, but it's really what we're trying to figure out is where should we land that's reasonable. And so that's for us to try to figure out tonight, and it's very difficult. Your staff has really looked at a number of places in the state, in the Bay Area, best practices. This is a tough one, a tough conversation. I think this is going to be our toughest conversation tonight, but I think we can get there. We have some options for you, and one of the things we may want to consider after we hear public comment and the council has time to think about this and ask us questions would be to focus on the general plan. It's this place where we started. The Planning Commission evaluated this. We actually came up with a study, and you start to use those ranges of 50 to 55, 60 to 65, near the highway or away from it, and then you go a certain percentage above that. It would be 50% above that number, for instance. And then it starts to put you into, think about, like, let's just say it's tucked away here in the back of Willow. The number would be 50, 55. And so it'd be 50% higher than that. So you're in the 75 number range. Well, then that gives you an idea. If you compare it to an air conditioner, you can compare it to something. And so what do you want us to start evaluating in the residential areas? We're talking about mechanical noises only. But what I'll tell you as a starting point for a violation, you need to be higher than 65, because we're going to have 50% of our community in violation of an ordinance. The other thing that we've changed, and it's a big one, is just right here in let's use Willow Avenue here. And so we have the liquor store behind us. And so you have commercial that is next to residential. And so where do you take the reading and where do you use the zoning? Would you use zoning in commercial or do you use it in residential? And so what we're recommending is you use wherever that business is, wherever that noise is emanating from, that is the zone that you use for the decibel reading, whatever the requirements are for that zone. So in this case, if you had an AC unit on the back side, you're using the commercial decibel number, not the residential. If it was coming from residential, you'd use the residential. It's a change. I want to highlight it for you. I know you have questions. I can see some of you, thinking about this. That's our recommendation as a starting point. General noise regulations, again, these are for nighttime. And again, our mechanical devices would also be regulated under the nighttime section. There's been a lot of, good news. We've done a lot of construction in town, and so you'll hear from residents tonight some thoughtful feedback. I'll give you the example again, our neighbors in Willow. They've been through a lot as it relates to noise, and I think there are a lot tonight. And so I think we should be very sensitive to the things that they've been going through, and they have some good perspective. But the good news is there were 5 major construction projects on the Willow Avenue kind of neighborhood area in the last few years. The bad news is there were 5 major construction projects, and so it impacted them, and it impacted them on the weekends. I think there's some conversation. We allow construction on weekends, and Adam can speak to the planning process. Sometimes you can even make exceptions, and we can talk about it. Most cities and towns allow that, but Kentfield, as some have pointed out, Kentfield actually restricts it pretty heavily and doesn't allow it on weekends. And so I think there's a conversation to be had of the pros and cons, and staff's here to help you with that, of maybe restricting or having a conversation about weekends and allowing outdoor construction if you want to restrict it. And so there's a lot to this, but I think we have a good starting point, and I think we can start through the ordinance and we can work our way as you wish through it with community feedback. Teresa and her staff, I think, have done a good job setting us up for success to really make some decisions, and also staff recognizing, based on what we hear tonight, that we can come back to you at the next meeting with an ordinance that we can all be proud of. We can enforce it. There's also been a couple comments about I think some confusion over the barking dog complaints and feeling that we were pushing it to the county, and we're not. We adopted years ago the county ordinance related to barking dogs, but we enforce it. Central Marin Police Authority actually enforces it. I have some kind of Central Marin Police Authority cards for you, and what you'll see from that is that really they push neighbors to work together. Number one, that we always want to do that. Mediation is available, and there's also citations. And so the police department, upon complaint, whether it's you give your name or you're anonymous, they go out there, they find the source of the barking or not, and they document it, and there's a process per the county ordinance. But we enforce that. What I'll tell you of hearing from the community over the last year, there's a lot of feelings of like, well, you're not doing anything. And I think some of it's an ordinance issue, but some of it is also a practice and administrative and communication issue on the staff side that I own. And this is an example. As we pass ordinances, barking dog, leaf blowers, noise with mechanical noise, how do we handle that? And the communication and education for Central Marin Police Authority, it's not always as good as it's been. And so I think from what we hear from you tonight and next meeting, you'll have that where we'll meet with the chief and we'll talk about the priorities as a town. Are we enforcing dogs off leash in the park? The quality of life issues. Something else that has really helped us with it is Michael being here, because Mike used to work for the police department. He understands it, and so he coordinates now all quality of life, code enforcement types of issues. He shares those issues with Central Marin Police Authority and works through it with them. And so, hey, this is a priority. What are we doing? And there's follow-up. And so I'm pretty sure that the residents of our community over the past few months have noticed a big change when they've had code enforcement issues, because Mike's been on top of it, and I think it's been a great addition. And no matter what we hear tonight or we talk about, I think that is a major component in whatever we do, because you can pass the best ordinance, but if you're not communicating, making it a priority, you're not going to get anything accomplished. With that, I'm going to stop talking. I'm happy to initially, if you have any questions or want to take public comment, but staff is prepared to methodically work through this ordinance, I think decision point by decision point, to get you through.
Questions? Okay, I wanted some clarifications. Residential properties other than multi-unit residences, where multi-unit residences are 2 or more units, and we're defining 2 or more, if there's a house and an ADU, that's considered one residence for the purpose of this.
Thank you. Our planning commissioner, Phyllis Metcalf, also, and I'm sorry, thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Mayor, sent us an email and had that very question. I'm going to pass this over to our planning director, Adam Wolf, to help us with that.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Yes, so you're right that that is not defined as a multi-unit residence, but I think it wouldn't hurt to just be, to clarify that aspect of the ordinance here to ensure that there's no misunderstanding, and that a primary residence, I'm sorry, I'm getting,
Don't you already have that?
oh, it is pointed out, is this in
9.36020?
D,
D.
in paragraph D? Yes, so it is already actually in there by definition, so thank you for pointing that out. I thought it was
Does not
actually,
include single-family homes with detached or
Correct.
attached accessory dwelling
I just wanted to emphasize that.
oh, all right.
Okay. And from an operational question, if someone gets home from work at, say, 5:30, 6 o'clock, and they use an electric leaf blower in their neighborhood, clean up their yard after work, would they be in violation? I think so. And do we want to go there?
Yes, leaf blowers are separate from everything. They have their clear restrictions, so they stand on their own, and
Right.
the times are clear. And so if they were over that time frame, they're in violation.
Okay.
The issue that we will have from an enforcement practicality of, right, I'll tell you that Central Marin Police Authority is not going to respond in 5 minutes or less to a leaf blower complaint. Okay, and so you're going to have you're going to have an educational component to this, right? It's after the fact. They weren't in violation at the time they got there, and so those are things that we're going to have to work through. If it's a daytime issue, Michael's going to be going out there, and we'll have a much better response time, I'm sure,
Right.
in his electric vehicle. So we're gonna dominate. But yeah, your bicycle, right? So.
All right.
I have one question.
One other question. The repeat complaints section. The way I read that, it's sort of a one strike. If you complain once, you're out of luck. If the I know they talk about second and so on, but all in all, it sounds like after the first complaint.
Yeah. So that's where we start of direction, and it's we want people to understand what the ordinance is, how important it is. We want compliance. You get one warning, and if you're in violation, we're going to move forward. I'll tell you by practice, and I think that goes back to direction from the council to the town manager of your priorities and what you expect. I'll give you an example, and this would be no different. We just passed the parking ordinance, the residential parking ordinance. And so for us, we're putting a mechanism into a 1-month education period, and also there's discussion between Corte Madera and Larkspur staff of would we consider we're going to give everyone one warning, and once you've had the one warning, we're citing. And so you even take a step above education. There's been a lot of discussion about it, and so whatever we do, we're going to be thoughtful in it. I would never describe our staff as heavy-handed when it comes to enforcement, and I think it's actually the opposite. I think you'll hear from residents that we're too laxed, and they want to see more enforcement.
I guess really I'm asking questions about 9.36.070. Sounds like if your first complaint doesn't stick, they're going to ignore you.
If I may, through the town manager and the mayor.
Okay.
This provision was actually taken from San Francisco's ordinance, and the purpose behind this is to prevent complaints from becoming a way to harass another member of the community. And so there's a sort of 3-step process. The first is if it's a first complaint that a person makes about a particular noise from, then it's investigated as you would imagine. And if it's found to be unfounded and there's no violation, if there's another complaint that's identical from the same person about the same noise source, then it won't be investigated unless the person complaining comes forward with some evidence to suggest that a different result would happen. And then the third step is if after 2 essentially attempted complaints that there was no basis for, then it wouldn't be investigated at all unless either the code enforcement officer or the Central Marin Police Authority felt it was appropriate to investigate. And so it really makes sure that the noise ordinance isn't being used as a vehicle for harassment. And again, this exact provision exists in San Francisco's noise ordinance.
Yeah, I know, but San Francisco Police Department doesn't answer any complaints.
So, Mr. Mayor, what I'll tell you is there was a couple examples. One was, went on for a long time, and a neighbor had an issue with some of the kids, and it was skateboarding and riding bikes down the street in East Corte Madera, actually. And it became a problem. And when you look at the current ordinance, and we have attempted to clarify and make it objective, not subjective. People weaponize the ordinance. And so when you read the ordinance, there was ambiguity. It wasn't clear. By the common sense approach, practicality, and determination of the police department staff and the town, there wasn't a violation, but you would get continual letters, you would get continual complaints and problems, and we were left in this really weird area. And so where staff landed with this is, if you look at the first sentence, resolved with the determination that there was no violation. Right? So you have to have some sort of investigation, you have to have some sort of determination, and once you do that on multiple occasions, at some point you have to move on with your resources. I'll tell you that you have a handful of community members that have issues with neighbors, and they weaponize the ordinance, and I think you put your Central Marin Police Authority in a really bad spot. So we attempted to speak to it, and we found the model within San Francisco. It's different. It's the city, not the town, but the issue is no different. And so we thought it was important, but you can't just decide, well, I don't like this person and we're not going to call it anymore. We felt it was important, if it's resolved by an investigation and the determination that there's no violation, and this is clearly a harassment type of issue, we're not gonna respond. And so, if you want to take it out, that's completely your right as a council, but it's an issue for your staff, and we want to make you aware of it and have that conversation.
I guess I'm trying to figure out if there's a way we can make it 3 strikes before we kick it out, or 2 complaints within 24 hours, or
I'll tell you, it'll
something like
never
that.
be enough, but as staff, before we don't respond to somebody, and I'm fine changing this any way you would like, but it would be multiple times. We would never do 1 or 2. It would be multiple. We'd spend a lot of staff time before we make that determination of not responding to a citizen's complaint.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Bob?
Yes, maybe for Mike. You don't have any concerns about enforceability of this ordinance?
I don't at the current moment, no.
At the
I mean,
current moment, okay.
I have a couple current
just wanted to make
cases right
sure.
now. I have a couple current cases that I'm trying to help resolve, but I'm trying to take them least officious avenues, in that try to work through the neighborhood issues and resolve the complaints with whether it's moving the mechanical device, or I deal with both mechanical devices and non-mechanical devices in terms of noise, but a lot of it I'm able to resolve through dialogue and getting the community together and the neighbors together to resolve these, almost like a mediation services. But so far, I know that during the daytime hours, I'll be able to assist with the enforcement, but a lot of this enforcement actions will occur through the police services to evaluate, conduct an investigation, and address the issue if need be.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And then, so the other question I had was, so my interpretation of this is that this basically would cover party noise between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. in the neighborhood, whether it's violating a decibel level or not, because I have a decibel meter in my phone, and Todd, you've been consistently over 60 decibels while you're speaking. So.
Just
And
don't call
I know
after
some,
10.
yeah, so, but I just want to make sure that's, because I know I've had issues with that before from other people, that, so that basically party noise, while it might not be over 60 decibels if it's loud, that would be included between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m.
Yes, that is correct. The decibel chart that's in your staff report and that's also in the ordinance applies to mechanical device noise only. But the general noise restrictions, which are a nighttime restriction, would apply to both mechanical devices as well as speaking or other types of noise. And there are a variety of factors that were considered in determining whether they're a violation, but the primary factor is going to be the level of the noise. But there's an ambient taken, the noise level will be taken, but it's not a magical decibel reading. There are other factors such as what is the nature of the noise, what is the origin of the noise? Is this a natural noise or something other than a natural noise? And what is the proximity to sleeping accommodations or residential properties, et cetera? And those noise restrictions will be applying from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. daily. So even if it is a mechanical device like a stereo that would not exceed whatever the decibel levels are for mechanical devices, it could still be a violation if it's done too loudly under all of the circumstances during the nighttime hours.
Thank you.
Can I ask just a technical question? Distance from the generator of noise is very important, right? And so if you're operating a table saw or a belt sander, which are in the 95 to 105 territory, you're getting that up close, right? But then our ordinance really is designed to pick up what noise is appearing at the property line, essentially, if it's all residential. Is there any way that you could give us an intuitive way to interpret the degradation of these source noises over 50 feet or some distance?
Your example specifies construction noise, and the town has its own specific ordinance as it relates to construction. So therefore, the noise that you're referring to would be prohibited based on the hours of construction and be an initial violation of construction after hours. Is that right, Adam?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, that was just that example would be yes, if you're doing construction during those certain hours from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. during the weekday, you're exempt from the decibel readings under mechanical noise. But I think your point that's I think part of what Todd was speaking to earlier, and this is a difficult issue because somebody may have an issue with the noise that's a certain distance away, but we have to establish certain consistent ways of measuring the noise from certain locations, and so it creates challenges from time to time. But I think here you're right; it's measured from the property plane.
One question I have is, do we need a provision in the ordinance that allows us, like the town manager, the chief of police, to suspend the ordinance if they shut off power and everybody fires up backup generators?
I'll speak to that because it was actually there are specific provisions in the ordinance itself that exempts noise from emergency generators in the instances of emergencies, and this is actually taken directly from our general plan in 2009, where this was a policy that was adopted at that time that says that those noises in those situations shall be exempted from noise requirements or the noise ordinance.
Okay.
So that is included.
All right. Good. Any other questions? Questions or comments from the public? 3 minutes, please.
Can you
We
please
gotta
go to the
record
mic?
you.
Can everyone please line up that are going to speak? Can you put the alarm on? Do you have an audible alarm?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, I heard it mentioned that working on the weekends, how about the homeowner that works 5 days a week comes home on the weekend and wants to do some work, construction work around his property, do some repair work, a little remodeling, is he prohibited from using tools?
No, right now, I'll wait, but we'll cover that.
Yeah, that was my question
Okay,
with this new ordinance.
okay,
Questions later?
okay. Any other
So,
questions?
sir, the protocol here, the reason why there's kind of awkward is that typically people ask questions, and then at the end of the questions, our town manager or expert who can respond does so all at once.
That's fine.
So we've heard the question. Todd's making a note right now. In about 5 minutes, he's going to give you a specific answer.
Peter Hensel, Willow Avenue. Yeah, I had a couple of posts going on next door about this. I've been following this issue for years. I'm disappointed in this noise ordinance. Basically, I mean, I guess you could, make a real case for ambient noise varying. I mean, I really see that. I don't dispute that. But what I'm seeing is you're jacking up the limit for a violation 40 decibels above ambient. It should be something like 20, And then he's saying also, air conditioners, they're 75 or something. How far away? Because speech, 3 feet away is 60 decibels, okay? And then you go like to the other side of the room and maybe it's down to like 52, So what David said about property line is very important. That's, has to be in there, and can you figure a degradation of the sound over distance? I mean, that's something you should be thinking about. But what I'm seeing here, I was in this room about 4 years ago when Central Marin Police did an all-court press to remove the general noise regulations. They had Mike Norton, they had Todd, they had Michael Lappert up here agitating for it, and it was just unbelievable because their remedy was, well, if you're bugged by a neighbor, take them under citizen's arrest. We'll be glad if you call us to come out and, arrest that person, citizen's arrest, or try to. At least, they would get a decibel meter on it. They would write a report. Then they would send it up to DA. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. I mean, that guy never does anything about noise. It would be a case dismissed, mandated back to the local jurisdiction, So they were just trying to get out of the whole realm of noise enforcement because it's not easy for them. I mean, I recognize that okay, here's a guy that straps on a gun and his life, is, in danger basically every time he goes up because he never knows what he has going to have to deal with. It could be somebody holding up the town center or whatever. And this, the noise thing to them, I think the police, they just think it's Mickey Mouse, and, from their standpoint, you can kind of see that. And I don't know if they're trained that well in public relations either, to be able to, hit that middle ground that Todd's talking about, because that's what it comes down to with, neighbors' things. Now, one thing I want to say too is that I'm not that worried about mechanical noise. I am not. I have this gigantic construction project going on next to me, but it has to be done, and I meditate and I can kind of, tune it out. It's pretty amazing to me that, they're going bam, 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 all day long, and I can kind of tune out. The noise that I object to is the voluntary one. The woman that's drunk across the street at 12, yeah, okay, let me just finish. 12 at night, and
30 decibels.
she's out talking to, somebody in Hawaii, and she's just screaming,
Peter, we've got a long
Yeah, okay,
day
but,
today, I'm sorry.
I just want to be heard on this. I don't want to be swept under the rug like Sloan said last time.
Okay.
What?
Doctor?
Bob Bundy, Golden Hind Passage. I think this is a good ordinance that you put together. I like the idea of just absolute ban on gas-powered leaf blowers. I think that's the thing that bothers most of us, and that's the work-to-noise ratio that we see with somebody chasing one leaf down the street. So I think that makes sense. There's also a lot of issues with the other gas-powered equipment, the sort of air pollution and the spare the air days that they ask you not to drive, but you still got people out with gas-powered weed eaters and such. I think that we may, though, be at a tipping point where we see that going to battery-powered leaf blowers or electric leaf blowers will also get people realizing that these really do work efficiently. I currently have a battery-powered weed eater, battery-powered chainsaw. They work really very well, much less noise, no pollution associated with them. So it could be that we want to look at issues of noise and pollution in the future on this, but I think for right now, what you've done is a good approach to it. I like the idea that this is being coordinated with Larkspur and San Anselmo. I think that makes sense from that standpoint. The one thing that I would like to see is cards available to neighbors, or something you could just print out off your computer that has in English and Spanish, the requirements to ban gas-powered leaf blowers, so that you could take it over to your neighbor or take it over to their landscaper and just hand that out to them, and it would be there in black and white. I also wanted to comment about the repeat complainants, and I know what Todd Cusimano was talking about, because this neighbor made life miserable for a lot of people in the immediate neighborhood, in the immediate community. And the police went to great lengths to try to respond, to this individual. And finally, they realized that, this was something that was impossible to resolve, and started slow walking it and then just not responding. And that was the appropriate response. And I think doing that sooner rather than later will save some police time.
Yeah, I'm Barbara Solomon, excuse me, 109 Willow in Corte Madera. My two pet peeves are barking dogs and construction noise, so I wanted to speak to that tonight. I live at the corner of Willow and Redwood, and in the last 5 years, we've had at least 5 major house or duplex renovations within a half block of our house. Some of these jobs have gone on 7 days a week, and I can tell you, there were many times that I felt deprived of the enjoyment of my house. I considered selling my house and moving away because there was so much noise. I'm one of the ones really kind of urging the town council to consider cutting back on construction, not allowing it on the weekends. I know we need new housing in California, but none of these projects created new housing. They're renovating existing housing. So I don't see why we have to have loud noise 7 days a week in a quiet little town like Corte Madera. I mean, let's follow Kentfield, let's ban it on the weekends. And in terms of barking dogs, I would suggest that the ordinance really lay out the procedures clearly for what the police department should do, the code enforcement officer should do, the complainant should do, what sort of mediation procedures are available. I think it's pretty nebulous right now. You can complain about barking dogs and talk about the section that the mayor was talking about, the repeat complaints. I mean, you can call about a barking dog that's left out on the neighbor's deck every night from 5 to 7 p.m. And there's a shift change with the police department, so they don't drive by for 2 hours. And does that mean there was no credence to your complaint that there was a barking dog? I mean, I think we need to look at that language a little bit in that section. So that's it. Thanks.
Okay.
Please don't move, Barbara. Stay. Please don't move. We like you as a neighbor.
Oh, no. I thought you meant I should stay here.
If you want.
No, yes, don't move. Peter?
Good evening, Peter Chase on Montecito. I'm here just to provide a piece of information where our company installs equipment and deals with equipment issues, generators, air conditioners, and so forth. Whether it's San Francisco or in rural areas on the peninsula, the code that we're required to follow is 80 dB, 10 feet from the property line, and that's a sustained noise for generators or air conditioning units and so forth. And we have to check it, and there's a code enforcement officer in most communities that will come and check it for 80 dB, 10 feet from the property line, and that's what we have to follow.
What does that mean at the property line?
Do you mean 10 feet inside the listener's property? So you're not measuring right at the fence
Yeah,
line?
10
you're
feet inside,
measuring 10
because
feet back
in some
because-
places, there's no setback with
Right.
buildings, so you have to be 10 feet away from the property line on their property or public property, as the case may be, 10 feet.
Okay.
So that's where a building would typically land on another property. Right. Okay.
Carl?
Hi, Carl Spurzum, live in Lakeside Drive here in Madera Gardens. I do want to commend everyone for the work they've done on this. I'm one of those who's been at this for about 5 years now. And I really commend the idea that we would ban gas-powered leaf blowers for many reasons beyond just noise. I guess my concerns with this are really pretty straightforward. I just feel this is completely unenforceable. I don't think the police want to come out to this. I'm not going to call my neighbor at 5:30 and call the police. I get it. Something has to be in writing, but I just don't see this as enforceable at all. I don't know how you enforce it. I don't have an answer for you, so I apologize. But it pits neighbor against neighbor, and nobody wants that. What I did want to talk about, though, is the noise levels, which we have in here in some detail, and I guess maybe you guys can talk about a little bit during discussion. I don't know how these levels were determined in the discussion here on page, well, in the summary here, this table of all the noise levels. This is not an easy table to understand. I'm assuming that the sound levels here in the middle column in all the different zoning districts of 40, 50, 55, I'm trying to understand that because doing a little bit of research, and I'm assuming the town staff has done this, you can get pretty good detail on noise levels of electric and gas-powered leaf blowers. And of the 27 electric leaf blowers that were reviewed here, there's only one at 50 decibels. Everything else is higher. So by matter of fact, if I'm reading this right, this table is completely unenforceable. It's just wrong right out of the gates. So I don't understand how these noise levels were determined. I don't understand where these noise levels are going to be taken from. I don't understand who's going to take them, who's going to be responsible for them, how are they documented. Again, the enforceability of this is troubling to me. I'm not a fan of leaf blowers at all. I'd love them banned completely. That's a wish. But I guess I really do want to reinforce how much effort you guys have done on this, and I really appreciate it. It's an extremely difficult issue. I like the steps we're taking, and my hope in my lifetime will ban them outright and bring back brooms, except for commercial use. We can all dream. Thanks so much.
I just brought one in just to show everybody, because I've been in construction 42 years with Steve Hoffmeyer from Willow. And thanks for all the homework that everyone's doing here. Appreciate it. I do want to let people know the reason that the gas blowers are popular by commercial people who do the work is because they're cordless. So until recently, you can see this Makita model, which you can buy and regulate here, 1 to 6, which is low, up to, and that's probably half the sound of gas powered. So as I was stating, the reason that people use the gas is because it's cordless. Now you can get these with 4 batteries and a charger. So I just wanted to give that information. And I agree with Barbara. I've been doing construction for 42 years myself. There's no reason even to have weekend work, okay? So, you know, guys can't get it done in 9 hours, then they're doing something wrong. So I totally back that as well. And everyone knows where we are. Peter and all the Willow gang here. Hopefully we can address some of our further noise issues so it doesn't lead into our beloved park. Basically, when we have Amazon delivering now and the trucks can't get around the corner and there's beeping going on all day, is it Corte Madera's job to do Bezos deliveries for them, the USPS? I say no, and I'd like the council I see Jim Robinson here. I don't want to thank him for his work 20 years ago in trying to get things done, and I know Todd's been trying. But we really got to go after this because they're parking in the park, and that's illegal. I can go, if you're going to let USPS do it, then Joe Malin and I can start bringing our big rigs in and parking down there as well. And Rob Martin from Tam Paints had to go through that with us as all of his employees were coming down and parking in our neighborhood. Kid talked back, and I said, we're going to have a little meeting later. Pulled Rob aside. I said, Rob, Joe and I will pull all of our trucks all the way around the block at Tam Paints. Kid wasn't there more than a week. So let's all work together on all this. It's really, really tough. It's emotional. But I want to preserve the park. I mean, as we all know, in the last 5 years, things have doubled. And, you know, Pat had a lot of, great stuff years ago, swimming pool, extra parking. Well, it is what it is. But, that is our jewel. Thank you.
What was the decibel reading? When he had the leaf blower on, it was in the 80s.
Okay.
Pat Ravazio again, 427 Oakdale. I really support this. I, too, have been following it, trying not to complain too much. But the leaf blowers drive me nuts. I love getting rid of the gas-powered. I would love it if there was also like a heads up to the commercial establishments that a full ban is coming. I understand economically not everybody can replace all of them, but if we can say like within a year we anticipate we'll go completely to electric, whether it's residential, multi-unit, residential, or commercial. I also strongly agree that we should be shutting down construction on weekends. I think we live in a really stressful time and people are needing their rest on the weekends, and to have people come home who have to work a long way away and come home finally to rest on the weekend, only to have not just the guy next door hammering, fixing a door or something, but to have full-on construction happening in a neighborhood at a home is just really too much. I think our stress levels require that the town do a good job of protecting the quiet on the weekends especially. And I think all you guys are doing a great job. Thank you so much for your work on this. I want to echo what everyone's been saying, that we really do appreciate it, even though we get up here and complain and want more and more and more. We really do appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.
Okay. Any council comments? Good.
Yeah, well, I have a question for probably our code enforcement officer here. What do you think about the criticism that it's nearly impossible to enforce because it's too complex and too hard to understand and not objectively quantified? When you look at it with your years of experience and having to be on the trenches dealing with this day in and day out, does this make sense? Is it reasonable?
Enforcement itself is can be defined in different ways, and I know the philosophy of Chief Norton and those in law enforcement. Sorry, let me get this closer. But we try to resolve complaints, citizens' complaints, the most effective way as possible, and that requires most of the time you'll see that there's been very few citations issued. I've asked the chief and the captain, have you issued any citations in Corte Madera in the last couple of years? And the answer was no. That doesn't mean they haven't gone out and handled a citizen's complaint, resolved the complaint by stopping the noise or making someone aware, educating them of the current ordinance. So I believe that's why we're here and we have this open discussion, because we need to chip this out a little further and find out what's reasonable and what the direction the council wants to give in terms of enforcement.
Okay, so I'm sorry, may I continue,
Sure.
Bob? So there's a couple of different...
the current.
Right, I just want to unwind a couple things there. I'm not asking about whether you think our level of enforcement is correct or not. Just whether, when you look at this statute or the ordinance, does it seem reasonably interpretable to a normal person? In particular,
if you're not around, to whichever police officer's got to figure it out in the middle of the night. And secondly, for our people who are trying to figure out whether the sounds that they're being subjected to is against the law or not. Does it seem to you that this is consistent with how ordinances typically are, and is it easily understandable based on your experience?
I believe it's a lot more clear than it was. And I'm saying that because before we didn't address ambient noise. And so a technical violation prior to this was a 40 decibel reading. And a 40 decibel reading, if you looked at that chart that Todd gave you earlier, it's I think it's a little bit higher than a whisper.
Babbling brook.
Yeah, so it's it specifies in the current.
You're at 60, by the way.
At 60, and I talk loud. But it gives us a clear threshold that is reasonable. And when I say reasonable, I know that ambient noise outside, I've taken readings. Today at 5 o'clock, it was 50 to 55. We need to be somewhat higher than what we have established, which says 40 in a residential. So all those air conditioning units, ambient noise is a technical violation. We'd have to do something. And just to directly respond to what you're saying is, the current allows for the proposed ordinance allows for to identify the ambient noise through the calculation of the mean, and then address the current addition to the ordinance, the 40, 50, 60 decibels higher than the ambient noise. So it's a clear threshold.
May I ask another question? Sure. What is your sense, or maybe Todd, about why we have a consistent level of complaints in the sort of Willow area? And maybe a better question is, will enacting this ordinance help the problem in any meaningful way?
I'm hearing two different issues in the Willow area. I'm dealing with one specifically with the mechanical noises across the street with the commercial business. And I'm hearing from the community today about the construction noise, and I haven't fielded any of those complaints. Again, I've only been here since April. But some of those noise complaints that I have received outside of Willow, I address those with letters and phone calls, and I show up to people's houses and just try to talk with them and let them know of the complaints. So
I get I'm sorry, one more. I understand the construction noise issue.
Sure.
But that's a good point, that your distinction, frankly, a very good analysis there about a distinction between, let's say, the trucks and so forth. Would the noise from the sort of crazy truck events be violative of the statute or the ordinance in some way that this makes a difference, or is that a problem that the ordinance does not address and could not address?
Thank you. Can I back up to
Yeah,
a couple
yeah.
other questions really quick? So one, you got to differentiate. The leaf blower ordinance is helpful for staff to enforce because it doesn't relate to the mechanical noise chart. It's separate. It stands on its own.
Got it.
Is it electric or battery driven, or is it not? Is it within those times? Is it within the zone that it's illegal? So it's very easy and tangible to enforce.
And by the way, one of the restrictions is never on Sunday.
Right.
For any of them.
And so that's easy for us to enforce. Again, you're going to have a response time issue. You're going to have an education issue. Also, you're citing the operator. So a question that I'm concerned about is for those landscapers and those gardeners where our residents know it's a violation, but do those landscapers know that? And so how do we educate them and who do we hold accountable? Because right now we're citing the operator. That's the way it has to be. And so there's education with that. So there's a few things we need to work through. As it relates to the chart, and I think you hit on it, and Michael did a good job explaining it. I think we need to simplify it. I'll tell you that as of tonight, when I read this chart, I started having questions. And so I think we need to, based on what we know within the general plan and the studies and thoughtfulness that we've already looked at as a town, we can I think we reset these numbers based on the general plan study, and then you put a percentage higher than that. And so it's easy for an officer, it's easy for a resident to understand it. Again, the first time we're going to educate that resident on their specific issue and go, hey, you're in violation of the ordinance, let's walk you through it. Let's educate you. And if it keeps going on and we can't mediate it, then you're going to get cited. So I feel like if we clean this up a little bit based on some thoughtful discussion we had tonight, I feel like that is easy to enforce. The Willow neighborhood, I have a deep respect for the things that they are going through. And it's unacceptable in some ways. In other ways, it's the way the neighborhood's been set up. You have the Civic Center here, so you have a little bit of traffic and noise that comes from that. You have the commercial business that butts up to the residential area, so you have some issues with that, as Michael talked about. You also have, a lot of construction was going on in the neighborhood, and so it's improving the neighborhood, but they've had to endure that, and I think the neighbors have been patient with that. The big one that really pushes them over the edge is the post office, and staff has gone to extraordinary efforts to help with that, and I'll tell you, I have never been treated as a governmental official in my 23 years in government as I had. And I've dealt with the IRS and I've dealt with every federal agency. I've never been treated as town staff as I have with the post office. As badly. And it's shocking. And I got to tell you that everything that was mentioned tonight in public comment is right on. And I think we're going to continue to work on it, but it's an issue and it's not okay. And so I think that's been very traumatic for our neighbors. Deliveries start at 3:30 in the morning. Insult to injury on a weekend, you lose 15 to 17 parking spots in our park because they park their post office vehicles. We want to have our post office. We love our post office, but it might be it's the wrong location for the use that it's being used for.
But Todd, the ordinance doesn't affect that.
It doesn't touch it. They're a federal agency. We can't enforce it.
That's what I thought. Okay.
So that's it. And then the other piece, just to Willow in the neighborhoods, and it's a good thing, but we have our park. And so we do have a skateboard park. We do have a playground. And it's in the area. And so they do deal with continual noise. And I think out of everybody in our jurisdiction, in Corte Madera, I think they are the most susceptible to it for those variety of reasons. And so I think this noise ordinance helps us define issues with commercial to residential noise. It helps us with leaf blowers. There's a discussion that we should have about construction allowing on maybe weekends, on Sundays. Do you want to consider restricting it? There's pros and cons to it, and I think Adam's here to answer those questions. So I think there's some things that we can help them tangibly, but it doesn't ultimately solve the problem.
Thank you.
In terms of construction, can we limit it by neighborhood in Corte Madera? Would we want to?
I think as a practice, the Planning Commission on projects will specify the times of construction, and it's based on the area and the circumstances. So I think Adam is positioned to speak to that. So can you repeat the question? Can you restrict construction on weekends for specific neighborhoods?
Oh, first,
By neighborhood.
You clearly could. I mean, it would require, obviously you just create zones or what have you, and you could create different construction hours for every different part of Corte Madera if you wish to. Obviously we're in an upswing in construction right now. I think a lot of neighborhoods, I would say, just on the construction end of it, there is a lot of construction going on throughout many neighborhoods in Corte Madera right now. Grove, Corte Madera Avenue, a lot over on the east side. So a lot of things come to mind, but so it becomes complicated. I mean, it just becomes more of a cumbersome and complicated sort of piece of legislation and ordinance to create and craft and go through that exercise and try to get appropriate hours for everybody. But it's possible. So if that was
Well, I'm not even saying. Let me back up. Many years ago, I lived in. Should be on. When I first moved to Corte Madera for the first 25 years, I lived in one of the typical Madera Gardens bungalows that had no insulation. And if my neighbor sneezed, I need to say Gesundheit, okay? Depending on which neighborhood you live in Corte Madera, a lot of the houses have been upgraded, so they have insulation and they're more soundproof, okay? Others, like my impression of Willow is most of those are fairly old houses and their walls aren't full of insulation, and so, if construction is occurring in a neighborhood of old houses, can we be more sound sensitive in terms of the timing?
I think that would be very hard to gain the evidence and go through and understand how every house and the insulation and sort of the sound quality was for all the houses and base some policy on sort of that information. A lot of houses have been remodeled and all sorts of locations. Some that's I think, a level of analysis that would just be very challenging to base some policy on.
Go ahead, yeah.
Todd? Sorry, before we go any further, I think we had a couple questions that, if you don't mind, Mr. Mayor, could we
Go ahead.
answer those questions first, and then we'll continue with this?
Thank you, Councilmember Bailey. I'd be happy to. Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So one of the questions was, is construction allowed for those that work during the week? Can they work on weekends? And currently, the ordinance does allow that. You can work on Saturdays, Sundays, and it's between 10 and 5. 10 and 5
on weekends.
Okay.
There was an issue about the enforceability. Again, I think it had to do. I think it is enforceable. And again, leaf blowers are exempted from this chart that we were talking about. I think there's a comment about cards to educate people on the ordinance. I think that's a great idea. It's similar to what we do with the barking dog ordinance with cards, and so we'll definitely institute that. I think it's important too that Barbara mentioned, we refer in our ordinance to the county. In our ordinance about the county ordinance regarding barking dogs, but we don't spell out what that is. And so we can do that, and we will come back to you with that. And again, I think we should update our card, and just looking at it, I think we can clarify, do a better job explaining the procedures. I do think we need to consider, and I don't know that we need to problem solve what exactly the number is for this chart, but I think it would be helpful to hear from the council, and I think the community would appreciate it, about coming back to you with a chart, redistributing the maximum numbers for the specific zones in the chart as it relates to mechanical noise, and then going a percentage above that to initiate a citation process. I think that's what staff is probably recommending for you after hearing some feedback. And again, post office noise is an absolute issue.
And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about construction on weekends if that's something that the council would like to hear from.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So the options are introduce the ordinance as is, have the staff work on it some more, or take no action at this time.
Well, we should talk just, unless you guys are ready to move on, just a
Yeah.
little bit about some of the things. Can I? should
I
go
think
first?
so too, yes.
Who wants to go first?
Go ahead, you're
Is that okay?
Talking.
Okay, so here's, the way that I come at this is we have a very specific ordinance that's been presented to us, and whether we don't have to make a decision tonight, we're expected to give direction about where to go with it. So we start with, is it better than what we have, or should we not go forward with it? Okay, so on balance, it seems like, if only because it coordinates with neighboring towns, and maybe adds certain standards, that the concept here makes some kind of sense that we have a uniform ordinance. All right, so then we go a little bit deeper. We listen to all the comments very carefully. You should know, Peter, for example, and others, we read all your correspondence and think about it at some length. You may not get the satisfaction that maybe we each would like to hope for, but the comments are well received, especially when they're respectfully given, which you always do, and coherent. The specific thing that I would ask, especially the people on Willow do, is unless you think that the ordinance is like worthless, come up with specifically how you think it could be modified or changed that makes some sense. So, for example, Peter said the ambient level should be at 20 or something. That wasn't, in other words, softer rather than, I don't know.
But let me just say, the ambient is what it is, but I'd say the violation was like 40 decibels.
Right.
above ambient.
So, Peter, and I'm sorry to cut you off. It's just that things can go crazy if we're not. My point was simply that he submitted a very specific, objective alternative to the way it's currently written. I wasn't quick enough to get it exactly right, Peter, but my point is, it was like a specific thing. That's the kind of thing that if you submit, we could do something about. On the other hand, I wasn't entirely sure from all the commentators whether on balance they were against it or just specific things in it. So I would ask before our next meeting, what's the plan, Adam, or when we have to, or Todd, when we have to make a decision on this? I don't think it's ready for first reading tonight.
We want to continue every meeting until you approve this. So we want to come back
Okay.
to you with any changes at the next meeting, and we want you to start the process
So-
of the first reading.
So I get that, and let me just say, and I'm sorry to go on too long to my fellow council members here, but I have seen this issue back before us again and again and again, so it's not going to be perfect, but if we can make it better than it is, then that's probably the way to go. a complaint that we heard repeatedly tonight and that I've heard independently over the years are the traffic noises. I get that and think that those are legitimate complaints. I don't think they are properly in front of us with this ordinance. That's just not what this ordinance is designed to do. For better or worse, that's a problem that is not in this thing. Okay, Bob, I think you've kind of persuaded me over the years here. I think I'm becoming 100% against the gas leaf blowers myself, and that by comment to my fellow council members, if we see a fresh ordinance to ban the gas ones, I think that might be favorably received, at least from my own standpoint. But I have no idea what everybody else thinks about that. The idea of not having construction on the weekends, I'm empathetic with that. I will tell you, my sense of it is that that might be going a bit far, but I'm happy to consider it if that's a real thing that people want to consider. I would be cautious to go that far at this time, but I've heard the comments and I'm kind of thinking about it. You want to go ahead, David?
Well, if I could just remember that it's not just commercial construction.
Yeah.
It's any weekend warrior, do-it-yourself person like myself who does gardening, sometimes with tools, never with a gas.
Which makes you cautious to enact such a thing.
I would be very cautious about taking away the right of people to do-it-yourself projects or weekend warrior kinds of projects.
All right.
Like building my boat. I'm sure I violated these standards when I was building the wooden kayak for my wife.
Yeah. Peter, love your comments as usual. I don't know where you are now, but the idea of having a specific, citation of some industry standard always makes sense to me, because then as the standard changes, we don't have to modify our ordinance. It goes with the current, if you will. Carl, I'm with you on the idea that I have concerns about the enforceability of the thing. I'm not against the concept. I like each of the concepts in here, but as I am with almost every new law, I get cautious about kind of the reality of it, and the best of intentions need to be enforceable. But I also leave it to our police and people who do the enforcement to tell me realistically. I like what it's saying, but I need somebody who does it to tell me whether or not is it enforceable or not, and I'm wholly reliant and trust you in that regard. Here's my thing, though. Be aware. There's a tension when you pass any local ordinance, as you probably all know, between the more specific and objective it is, the more then you take any real discretion out of the hands of the people who do the enforcement. I recognize the teeth gnashing that follows when something seems obviously wrong and doesn't get enforced. But on balance, from my own perspective, sitting on the council here for some years now, our police do kind of an amazing job, weighing competing demands in rapidly changing situations and finding sort of there's a word for it. It's like neighborhood policing. There's some word for it that means where they're kind of smart. They use real person judgment, and I'm cautious about handcuffing, if you will. I'm mixing metaphors there, but I'm cautious about being overly restrictive in what they have to do, because it takes away the very thing that I think makes them effective. Nevertheless, my explicit request to all of you is, if you have specific changes, I do generally like them. We dealt with the Willow things, and those are all my comments. Sorry for going on too long.
Wow.
Yes.
I'm generally in agreement with your comments. I would caution us about having tighter restriction on weekend work for the reasons that I mentioned. I think a lot of people derive their relaxation from taking on a different activity in the weekend, and that may involve hammers and saws and sanders. I have no problem with moving towards a banning of all gas leaf blowers myself as well. I'm curious about why there are exceptions in this draft for schools and town properties for the leaf blowers. And if you could just explain that, please, and maybe that will seem a little bit of hypocritical.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in the middle. Again, I'll tell you that for every 5 people that want a complete ban on leaf blowers, I could find 5 others that support it. Okay, and so I can't put an exact number if it's 50-50, but you have a strong contingent on both sides. And so we try to land in the middle, and again, staff went back, right in Larkspur. They're very similar to us. They have the same issues. They have commercial, they have school districts, they have town staff. And that process was thoughtful. It's on the public record. I thought it was really good, and I thought the council did a good job deliberating and kind of finding a middle ground based on what they heard. And so they banned the gas power, but they do allow gas power. They have exemptions, and it's in the commercial areas, it's in the school districts, and it's for staff. And so we, again, for enforceability, we thought they made good changes. It was a good, thoughtful process. Not that we necessarily agree on every point. It's for council to consider. It's your decision. But we thought it was a good starting place for a conversation. I'll tell you that town staff still uses gas. We're starting to move to battery powered from an ergonomics standpoint and helping our staff. They're lighter. They really were able to do pretty much everything we need to with them. And so we're starting to transition over the next year. And so we're very sensitive to if we're going to ban something that we should do the best we can to follow those rules. But right now we are exempt. Our intent is over the next year, though, to transition the best we can to battery power. There are still some areas in our jurisdiction where there'll be a discussion between the two of using gas power. They're more powerful, and it's just they're more efficient in some situations. So the school district is exempt, and again, the commercial businesses, the shopping centers would be exempt. So that's important to note. It mirrors Larkspur. Again, the business community came out pretty heavy in Larkspur regarding it. They haven't so much to this point, but I know it is a concern for them. And honestly, I think we can go any way possible. I would just say that we should have a transition phase, though, for staff to allow us to get there, if that's the way you want to go, and also allow us more discussion with the commercial, larger property businesses. So.
I would also support phasing out gas-powered leaf blowers. One thing I would say about town staff, please get them to wear earplugs, because I can't tell you the number of times I've been coming into the building and some guys out between here and the fire department with no earplugs, and I'm sure, you know, he's going to have the hearing of a kid who used to go to heavy metal concerts all through college.
Thank you. Well, they are trained and mandated to wear their protective gear, so thanks for bringing that to my attention.
Yeah,
So I'll
when
look
I
at
go
it.
in, I always go like
Just got
this,
someone in
and
trouble,
he
Mr.
then
Mayor.
scurries. The other question is in terms of the annoyance of the sounds, are there any studies as to the pitch? Because if it's a low tone or a very high tone, how far does the sound travel, and do we know? Because it's not just decibels, but it's also pitch.
I'm very sensitive to that question, because I once had a neighbor who woke me up from a nap with something that sounded like a screaming baby, and I think it was an electric leaf blower that was plug-in. This was 10 years ago. It was a lousy one.
There are many studies out there, and you know, you have the language of normal sensitivities, and what does that mean exactly? And I think there's people, and I think, you know, Carl's one of them. He's very sensitive to noise, right? And I think, and so we're all different. You just can't enforce something like that. You're going to have to make a decision based on the evidence that we know between gas and battery powered, or you do an outright ban. You know, I think that's where we're landing. I can show you a study both ways. It's an issue in our community. Again, I think we found a thoughtful middle ground, and I think will evolve as we go. You know, I think this is a good place to start.
Okay, good enough. Any other comments?
Yes.
Bob hasn't gone yet.
Okay.
I just want to thank the public for all your thoughtful comments and time on this. I really appreciate that. I do remember our meeting 4 years ago on this topic. Sloan and I were there. Peter, I know you were there. And Peter, thank you for your input. I understand your issues. I think this ordinance largely addresses the issue you were talking about 4 years ago, because it's creating something I think that is clear and enforceable. Sloan, I largely agree with everything you had to say about this, so thank you.
It's a good night.
As always, yeah. And the one thing I did want to talk a little bit about is the construction issue, and I would like us to think about that a little bit more and talk about that. I'm highly sensitive to noise also. That's why I have a decibel meter on my phone. But there's got to be some way to solve this, because I know there's a lot of people who are do-it-yourselfers who need to work on the weekend. They can't do it during the week. They need to work. On the other hand, nobody wants to hear a power saw at 9 a.m. on Sunday. So there's got to be some way to work something out here that works out for everybody and solves the need for homeowners who are working 5 days a week to fix and work on their home on weekends, but at the same time preserves the peace and quiet of the neighborhood. And I'm not sure exactly what that is, but maybe staff can do a little bit more research, a little more work on that and figure out something and propose a compromise. But I think there's got to be a way to figure that out that solves that for everybody. But that would be the only other thing that I would ask about on this as well. So thank you. Great work.
Okay, good.
So thank you. I just want to repeat what I think I heard. I think we're on track for the leaf blower. We need to do some more work on our chart regarding making it tangible and easy to understand and reasonable for mechanical noise, and then come back and try to come up with some options for weekend construction. Those are the three primary points.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
We'll be back next meeting.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, then the next item is the recommendation of the Park and Rec Commission concerning the dog park, so.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Staff has been working closely with the Park and Rec Commission after staff received direction from council to continue to work on this project and bring it back to you.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is the dog park one.
Oh, I'm sorry. You gotta hide.
My house abuts the town park, so I've got to recuse myself. I'll go. There's not even any sweets in the kitchen, but I'll be back in the kitchen for a while.
So we've got to get sugar in the kitchen, all right.
Okay, hold on just real quick. Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Okay, so the recommended action, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, is to receive the recommendation from the Park and Recreation Commission regarding the placement of the proposed dog park and associated amenities, and to provide staff regarding a location and a preliminary budget for potential construction of the dog park in Town Park adjacent to the rear of Park Madera Center, and to direct staff to work through the Planning Commission for consideration of design review and a conditional use permit prior to returning to you on a final review of the approval and the funding allocation. It seems like a long process. It's not. We're hoping to get clear direction from you tonight and immediately start a quick process with the Planning Commission. And so staff work with the Planning Commission. Again, we started this process with a number of locations and evaluating the pros and cons. After the last meeting, we narrowed it to 2 potential locations. One was on Pixley Avenue, and the other one is, again, what I have before you today, to the rear of Park Madera Center in Town Park. I'll tell you that staff really presented, and that was my decision. I presented a single option to the to the Parks and Rec Commission a few meetings ago, and it was this current location you see. It was to the rear of Park Madera Center. I did it primarily because I saw and felt like there were a lot of issues regarding noise in our local neighborhood here on Pixley and Willow. And again, we heard from a number of residents at that commission meeting of their concerns that we would consider placing a dog park on the medium strip out in the parking lot across from Pixley. And so we focused really on this location that is highlighted for you. And there's a few options to consider. And so I'll start off on the upper left there. You'll see the dog park. It's 0.37 acres. It's 518 feet of fence. We currently have temporary fencing up there now. We have noticed the community adjacent to the entire town park, so they could take their time and go out there and look at it. The Parks and Rec Commission also, at one of their meetings, went out there with staff and we visualized this location. And our conversation at the commission was this very thing of having a dog park here in orange, top left, as option one, something we feel like we can take to the Planning Commission and really get this back to council and get it going within this fiscal year. We initially budgeted $50,000. The estimate for fencing and amenities and any ADA improvements is estimated in your staff report at $65,000, so we feel like we can do that. And then you have a few other options of right now I'm sharing the discussion with you with the Parks and Rec Commission. We talked about the potential of a small dog park, and you can see that in blue. There's potential environmental issues as we get close to the creek. There's also a drainage area here, but we talked about it, and so it's something we're not recommending action tonight, but it's something staff is going to continue to evaluate if it's possible, because we think this would be a good location potentially. But really, we're focused on option one in orange. Like, let's put up some fencing, let's do a little bit of grading, let's add some amenities and access.
And to be clear, when you say a small dog park, you mean a park for small dogs?
A park for small dogs, yes,
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, okay.
Thank you
Just
for
want
the
to make sure everyone
clarification.
understands that, yes.
Yes. So right now, what we're at, again, top left, it would be for all dogs. But again, we've heard the community, the commission, and the council in the past of, hey, if it's possible, let's look at maybe a park for little dogs and large dogs. So option 2 and 3 in any order, they can be at the same time. They can be spread out over fiscal years. There was a discussion of a path, and so we have the pet club there, and it made sense to see let's see if we can have access from the shopping center into Town Park to the dog park. And so you can see that there right in the middle, working with our engineering staff on what that would look like. Right now, that estimate for that is approximately $36,000, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Roy Wolford, a longtime resident, reminded staff and the council in an email that we used to have access here, and there were issues. And so what was happening is a lot of people in the park were taking over all the parking for the shopping center. It was causing a lot of problems. And so ultimately, they closed that access. Talking to staff that were here in the historical context of it, one of the major issues that we had is, and it's really not a problem now, we have a really healthy, strong soccer program, outdoor program. And a lot of the community members live in the town, and they understand where they can park and where they can't. The major violators back in the day when we had access was the adult soccer leagues. They lived outside of our jurisdiction, and really they were the primary violators of that, of violating, parking. And so staff feels like this is something we should strongly consider as an option. We're working with the shopping center owners now, and I have a meeting scheduled with the pet club owner to see what types of things we can do to work with them if we were to open access to improve their business as well. So we see some possibilities there. Again, it's about $34,000. It could be within the budget this current year. If staff wanted to spread it out over a couple fiscal years, we could do it. And at the same time, we started a conversation at the commission of, is it possible, we did the master plan for Town Park, I believe in 06, 07, 08. And one of the things they talked about was access from our current parking lot on Eastman Extension. It's to the left of your map. And then having one way going in and parking diagonally, approximately 18 spots, and then being able to come back out into the shopping center as an ingress egress. There was some conversation of the potential to do that. And so that's a conversation that the commission had, and they really supported these 4 concepts. The primary concept is let's get a dog park, top left. If you can, let's see if we can get a dog park for small dogs to the right. And they really like the access point and parking as well. But again, understood that there's some more analysis to be done. They don't want us to get bogged down in process. It's like, let's get something that we can be proud of and move forward with. And we feel like we can do that. Rebecca, can you go to the engineers? So what we did then is we met with our engineers to see if we can to see what they think about our, and Nathan Blomgren did that. We didn't use a $30,000 consultant. Nathan was nice enough as one of our commissioners to help us with that sketch that I just went over with you. You can go down, keep going, right here.
That's it.
Okay, so this is now our engineer sketch. And so our engineer then looked at environmental, where's our drainage, what's reasonable, and this is what they came up with. And so you can see top left, that's the dog park. We have some amenities in there. We can do a bench. We have ADA compliant entry. We're considering bringing water over there. Can we do that? We think we can. And again, some minor grading. Again, that's within the budget on your fiscal impact of page 3 of the report. It's $65,000. They also believe for $36,000 that we can make access into the park. You can see that on the bottom middle of your screen. And then they really recommend, they're like, hey, if we're going to add access, we should consider parking very close in time. And if you look at this, it's not 18 spots, I believe it's 8 to 9. But to consider parking here, it would be a low cost for us. It's about $43,000. So we could, we could add access, but we also add parking stalls, which is great for us. The more parking we have, the better. There's potential some fire lane issues that we have to work through on it. But again, staff feels like we can take this to the Planning Commission, bring it back to council pretty quickly. We could do all three. I'm recommending that you consider giving direction for the location and the budget of $65,000 to immediately take this to the Planning Commission and get this back to you as soon as possible. And then staff will continue to evaluate and bring back to you additional parking stalls and access from the shopping center into the park as quickly as we can. So that may be the start of next fiscal year. But again, it's a priority for us. And I think as we go, we'll continue to evaluate to the right a dog park for smaller dogs, but also looking at other locations that we've continued to talk about on the east side of Corte Madera and other locations. So that'll be a continued process, and we'll work with the commission on that. And with that, I'm happy to stop and answer any questions you have.
One thing with the layout with the sort of, let's call it large dog and small dog park, it was pointed out that we're going to try and keep the basic coverage on the ground as being grass. If we have to close the large one, having the small one would enable us to sort of shift everything over there while we redo the grass on the large parcel. So I'm just...
Yeah, what I'll tell you is that I think, and Adams, I don't want to make him cringe, he's staring at me, I don't want to look at him, but I think the farther right we go on the screen, we get into environmental kind of complexities that will definitely slow our process and cost us a lot of money. And so I think the concept of a dog park for large dogs and small is, we hear it loud and clear, and I think we're probably going to look for a different location. But again, we'll still vet this. But I think that's the way we're headed. But I wanted to share the discussion and background for the council of the thoughtfulness that I think the commission has really put into this.
Good.
Question: if we were to move on the earlier concept drawing and essentially open up what is now a closed to all pair of parking spaces at the far northern end, what is that, the far western end of that parking area? Yes, you're pointing to exactly the right thing, Chief. Where do you put dumpsters, and where do you handle the sort of the utility uses that are there at present?
Yeah, so if you look at, so if you look behind, do you have a? Yeah, it's okay. So what we're looking at is we're looking at putting in a bocce court here. We're looking at these spaces within the current parking lot. You're referring to the current dumpsters that are in the shopping center, and then behind it you see a cement easement, and you see we also have dumpsters. Staff is going to move the maintenance. This is from our Public Works maintenance team. We're actually going to move this out of this area, and so we're going to open it up. And our thought is potentially considering moving this farther into the park or moving it to this side of the shopping center. So we're going to evaluate different options of adding parking or improving ingress, egress, and fire lane safety as our fire team's over there. I want to be careful I don't upset them.
Okay.
So I think we have some options. And this, again, keeps us out of environmental issues. Right here, this is good. But I think as we start to go in this way and move this way, we start to get into drainage and environmental issues. One other thing I wanted to mention, staff is sensitive to noise. I focused on why we didn't consider Pixley. I also want to be sensitive to our residents on Mohawk. We've heard concerns since the master plan back in 06, 07, 08 of soccer fields and doing things on this side of the park. So I think you may have residents tonight that want to speak to it. It's something staff is definitely sensitive to, and I think that's the importance of the Planning Commission in that process. It's something we'll evaluate parking, and we'll absolutely evaluate noise. And part of it, the commission didn't weigh in on it, but it'll be for the Planning Commission, will be times. Will we follow times within the park? Will we narrow them in scope of allowing this dog park to limit it in hours of use? And so that's something that we'll definitely listen to the community on through that process. And so that hasn't been vetted yet. That's for the Planning Commission. So.
Questions? Okay, any questions, comments from members of the public?
Hi, I'm Stacy Prince, and I live at 26 Mohawk Avenue. I've lived on Mohawk for 24 years, and I'm here on behalf of my part of the neighborhood, and we all oppose the dog park. I really like dogs, so I'm just going to say that up front. And I like my neighbors with dogs. I like their dogs. I like my family members. I like their dogs. So this is not about that. But the assumption that all of us want dogs or are comfortable with dogs or are okay with the repercussions of having this dog park, I think is unfair. So I'm going to do this very quickly. The first thing is the noise and barking. You talked a lot tonight about noise ordinance, and you talked a lot about what the effects are on Willow in relationship to the parking and the issues on the park at this end. But we would then be essentially getting that on our end of the park. So when you're talking about added parking spaces, you're talking about more cars, you're talking about more dogs, you're talking about dogs interacting with each other, which means there will be more barking. And those of us in that part of the community will be definitely affected by this. The second thing is about the parking. Already there aren't very many parking spots that are by Cafe Verde and in that community that are currently available for that part of the park. It would be highly impacted by this. When you say that, quote, the more parking we have, the better, I have issue with that. The third thing that I'll say, and I'm just going to call it out, is poop. So we all know that there would be an increase in poop. And while people say they clean things up and so forth, the back gate of my home is where there is already an area that has a trash can and a dog picker-upper and all of that. And we often end up smelling it and dealing with it on a regular basis. So by adding a dog park essentially in our backyard, you are adding to that issue. And the final thing I'll say is the pass-through. There are issues around the pass-through that when I first moved into the community, that pass-through was there. And there were vagrants that lived or that were often in that area. There was excessive drinking and smoking pot and people walking through and being able to access both the parking lot and be able to party and get access to the gas station store and the liquor store here, and then be able to pass through and hang out in that area. So adding that back in is also problematic. So I just would like you all to consider these issues as you move forward. The assumption that everyone loves dogs and wants that there is not fair, given that you have a whole community of people that will be affected by it. Thank you.
If you can line up, go ahead.
We weren't properly lined up, but Peter Orth, 1200 Meadowcrest. And I guess one of the things that we all come from different perspectives on stuff, and I appreciate that not everyone likes dogs. We've raised Labradors, over 35 years or so, and they're pretty big dogs. And I've taken them to a lot of dog parks, and I currently have a very active 2-year-old mixed breed that's about the size of a Labrador. And one of the things that people might do if they really want to experience some of it objectively, Mill Valley has a very big dog park area, and it's by the fields that they use for the kids and stuff. It's a bike path there. When I've gone there, and it's been there a long time, I used to live in Mill Valley, I know they have a kind of a community spirit there, and especially there. Big dogs and small dogs interact just fine. Matter of fact, it's really, I think, better for both of them. The noise factor doesn't seem to be there. What I see the bigger dogs doing and wanting to do is run run with each other, and that's the beauty of a off-leash area for them. It isn't play that you see or the dogs you hear in a neighborhood that are left alone. That's probably one of the worst things to hear, and we all have that problem because of the nature of our community, the hills and the valleys and stuff like that, and that's been a continual issue. Any lonely dog or a dog that doesn't have a job to do and feels abandoned makes more pitiful and painful noises than the dogs that are playing. The playing isn't about barking, it's about running, in my view. But the park is there, it's really accessible, it's right across from the safety station. And go and take a look at it and see what happens there. And the regulars there do pick up stuff, and I don't think you're going to be able to keep pretty grass there if it's really used. But they do, they put a lot of chips there and stuff, and it's perfectly acceptable to walk on and so forth. So if you want to see one, go down to the one in Mill Valley and look at it. It's pretty well run, and the dogs figure it out. Thank you.
Please stand.
So David McPherson, Corte Madera Avenue, and I brought Angus, your canine constituent, with me, but he was a little too squeaky, so I left him outside. We have been using it twice a day for the last 3 months. The park, the temporary fenced-in park.
The prototype.
And the way we utilize it is because he's a Border Collie Great Pyrenees, he's a working dog. He loves to run. He'll chase it. Tennis ball for 40 minutes. I stand at the top of the hill, pop the ball up, and he runs like crazy, grabs it, and whips around and comes back. So we've been there. Interestingly enough, in that entire 3 months, twice a day, we have not seen one other person. So hopefully we'll get more dogs out there, and it'll be well utilized, but not once in all those times that we visited did we ever see any dog poop. There is human waste actually along the fence line and toilet paper, so hopefully I actually think that by putting the dog park in there, we're going to minimize the likelihood that homeless people or whoever's using that as their toilet will use that. I think having it be a little bit more active and fenced in will help. My only comment would be drainage down in the swale would be excellent. The hill drains down and it'll get pretty muddy. And as long as we're bringing in water for a drinking faucet and a dog bowl, it would be nice if there was a hose bib, that style that you have to press and hold down and has a limited time so that you can actually rinse off your dogs before you put them back in a vehicle if you've driven your dog to the dog park. Those are my only comments. I sincerely appreciate that the town's put in this effort, and I hope it gets built sooner rather than later.
Hi, Pat Ravazio again, 427 Oakdale. I first got involved in trying to get a dog park here way, way long ago, and the reason was because I met a woman in town whose mother had recently passed away, and she had lived in Madera Gardens with a little dog, and she'd walked her dog every day, but never really got to know anybody. And the daughter said, gosh, if only my mom had had a place to go and be able to connect with people. As an older woman, she would have been able to go and sit in a dog park and have her dog play and then maybe meet some other people in town. So as much as I love dogs, and I have 2 little dogs, my goal is to bring community together. And my feeling about a dog park is, and especially a dog park in this location where it's tucked away, it's not real publicly visible, that it will become a really nice community connection point for people who live nearby, and maybe ones who live up on the hill who would like to exercise their dogs but don't still have the mobility to be able to go out on the trails. I am understanding from the Mohawk Street that they are seeing this as a possible imposition on their neighborhood. I think pulling it back, I was really never in favor of this little area over here because it's so much work to just get that cleared out, that being back farther away, I think it will actually remove some of that poop along your fence, because people will have a legal place within the park to actually let their dogs run. So I think, and I agree too, that the noise and barking that is the real problem is when dogs are left alone. Dogs playing around in a dog park might, gruff around with each other a little bit, but it's not going to be that incessant, ongoing barking and barking and barking. I do think we do need more parking at Park Madera Center and at the Recreation Center. It's an important part of our ability as a community to make the rec center work financially, to be able to offer events and have people have a place to park, and we know that's always been a problem. And as far as this pathway through here from Park Madera Center, I strongly support that. I just think we should look at our town and say, what if it were Carmel? What would we do? And we would open it up and we would make it nice. And I think the reason why the homeless people, and actually the homeless people, I think the problem became worse once we closed off that path, because then they had like a secluded place back there where nobody was going to bug them because there wasn't even a gate. And I think opening things up and making places visible and open is what's going to make us less desirable to undesirable, overnight campers who just want a place to hang out. And okay, in 8 seconds, I just think we need to limit the number of dogs per individual. I think you take those as professional dog walkers, and that could be a real problem. So 1 person, 3 dogs max.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, David Stamick. My son lives on Lakeside, right at the corner of Mohawk, and then I'm representing 19 families that have condos here on Pixley.
Okay.
And I'm glad you're not thinking about putting it on this area here next to Pixley. We kind of have to live with the skateboard park, and we were very supportive of putting that in. I hope there's going to be some kind of regulations and ordinance that will be enforced, because they don't enforce the ordinance to the skate park. And the dog waste that's on the ground doesn't get cleaned up. I work in the medical field as an EMT, and I know when you pick it up, you've still got everything else there on the grass. And if the kids are around there, I see the dog walkers. I have 3 ladies that come by my place about twice a week with 30 dogs. They each have 8 to 10 dogs apiece. And they say, oh, well, they're not a problem. They are a problem. They clean up, but what's down here, then I have to wash with a hose. So I'm hoping that if you put that there, you won't have more dog litter. I'm the one that originally got the dog banned from the park because our kids were playing soccer there, and there was so much in the dog waste there on the park for the little kids that we'd scoop it up, and it was still there. So we started picking it up with a shovel, and we brought it to the council chamber one council night, so that they would get the impression that's why we got that ordinance. But that could get out of hand, and I really feel for the people at Mohawk. They've got a soccer game that goes on right on the hill behind them, and they get that noise in there. And I'm sure that noise ordinance, I get out there to the disaster trailer, and I hear them on the weekend, and they have to put up with the soccer games. And I'd hate to see them have another a problem here with the dogs. Thank you.
Jim Robinson, Ash Avenue. I would consider myself neither a proponent or an opponent of the dog park. I understand the need for it. My wife and I walk that area every evening. That's our evening walk, and you will always see many, many dogs off leash in that park. And having had to sit on your side of the table, I know it's almost impossible to enforce that. We first moved to Corte Madera. We had a dog, and we found that there was no dog park here other than one in Larkspur. I don't even know if we had one in Larkspur at that time, but we did go to Mill Valley, it was mentioned, and also Sausalito. I guess my concern is that I don't know what the situation is now in terms of demand, but there is some sort of quid pro quo if those who already leave their dogs off leash, if they would have matriculate to this part of the park and use that rather than let them run off leash. I think that would be one advantage of having a dog park. I live on Ash, and I appreciate the noise issue. We have dogs that are left outside of their home when people go to work every day and they're out there from 8 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock at night barking, sometimes incessantly. When you walk along the path just north of the Neil Cummings School there, just walking by there will set them off. And I would have to say that each time I've called Centralman Police, they've been responsive and have taken some action. But I do appreciate the concern expressed by our first speaker. Just a couple of things. If the town is to consider putting in a dog park there, it's going to increase the level of pedestrian activity, the volume of cars. I think our parking lot that's joins our rec center there is far behind in terms of getting it restriped and repaved, and maybe there's some additional parking that could be provided by going to compact spaces. There's also an inoperable fountain that's over at the corner of where people would be accessing if they were to park in that north parking lot as opposed to this town center here. And I would also suggest that I walk by it and concern about there's a huge eucalyptus globulus tree that's on that path there. And I love those trees. I had 26 of them when I lived in San Ramon, but they are a hazard and they are dangerous. And I think it's probably about time we look at either removing that tree or seriously trimming it. Along the path, there are a number of places where there's undulation where caused by tree roots that are beyond ADA standards. I think ADA standards only a quarter, but that's an area that needs to be repaved if there's going to be more foot traffic there. But I don't know what the solution is to the noise level, and I don't know what the noise level will be there. But I think any restrictions we put on that dog park are going to be almost as difficult or more difficult to enforce than we did for many, many years for no dogs off leash in town park, except in restricted areas within the town. Thank you.
Lucinda Smith, Alto A. I think that a lot of the comments that have been made are very applicable, particularly the number of dogs that are allowed for one person to bring into the park. I think the park, as designated here, is too small. I really think that it needs to be larger. You would have greater space for the dogs to run around and play. They wouldn't interact as much in a way of barking and causing the noise, I believe. I think the dog park you're talking about in Mill Valley is much bigger. This looks very small to me as being one that's applicable for a number of dogs to really enjoy. I think maybe if they took a little bit more of this area that I know is causes economic or environmental issues. And Todd, I wish you would please explain what those environmental issues are other than drainage. Drainage is important. It's got to be dealt with, period, whether we go that extension or not. But it's unbelievable that we've got so many restrictions from an environmental standpoint that we can't move and make a reasonable sized dog park and put the dollars into it rather than patch something that's not going to work for the future. Thank you.
What's
Comments?
What's the approximate acreage of the layout there? Is that 1.5?
It's in your briefing book. It's
0.3, I think it's 0.35 acres.
Yeah.
0.35.
I'll tell you that, can you, it's okay. Yeah, 0.37. So, the center of the area, there's no environmental issues going into the park. We were just sensitive of going into the park at all. We wanted to be, and then we're also sensitive, the environmental comes here when you start to get into noise, right? The closer you get to Mohawk, you're getting closer to the property lines on the side. You're also getting close to drainage and the creek. It's not undoable, it's just you have to go through a lot of analysis and cost. And the question is, and you're also talking about trees, removing trees. And so we start to have issues here. This isn't undoable, it's just not ideal. And then also, what I'll just say, staff would love to have an acre in Corte Madera for a lot of projects, in a dog park. We're just limited in our locations. And I think we've talked about this for probably at the commission level on and off for years. I think this is a place, it's not, I don't think it's perfect by any means, but I think it's the best option for us to consider. And so that's what staff has brought forward. And, again, we're happy to answer any questions. I think there's a lot of positives. There's still work to be done, as residents have brought up. And I think there's still the process within the Planning Commission to work through those. And I feel like we can get there.
Todd, is the blue rectangle a waiting pond? Is that another bench that has a different meaning than the bench that's orange, brown? Oh, what is that?
I think that one's an 80, yeah. So we just put in a couple, within our budget, we try to just throw in some amenities of a water feature, a couple benches. Again, there's some consideration of what we do for the ground and some grading and fencing. So that's the $65,000 kind of question there. Again, when we get to the Planning Commission, we'll spend a little bit more time of the types of amenities that residents would like to see. We just try to give you a concept that we think we can deliver very quickly, if you so wish to do so. And again, I think it's something we can build on from year to year as we go as well.
Go ahead. Any other comments?
Yeah. First off, thank you to staff for your work on this and for moving so quickly. We have been talking about this for a number of years, and we talked about it in the council meeting just a couple of months ago, and you guys have done a great job of moving quickly on this and moving forward, so I thank you for that. I am very sensitive to the noise concerns on Mohawk. I think we need to be careful about that. But I also do have some experience in dog parks, and I agree, if dogs are running, they're not making noise. They're just having a good time and running around. So hopefully noise will not be an issue. We just need to carefully monitor this. Do we know how far this is from Mohawk approximately? Because my memory of it, I've walked this thing several times, is it's not that close.
So some of the closest residents would be in the 200 to 300 foot range.
Okay, so we're not right in their backyard, but we are a couple hundred feet away. Okay. And then I would say,
Can you blow that up? So what is?
This gives you an idea.
Here in this part of our noticing.
What are we looking at here?
It's a map of.
Just to explain a little bit about what you're looking at, Mayor and council members, this was the map of the area that staff noticed, and we did a notification range of 300 feet. But the park parcel, we went from the community center at 498 Tamalpais because that is the whole area that you see in dark red that looks like two rectangles stuck together. And then what Marin Maps does is it grabs 300 feet from every point of that rectangular dark red area. So you can see the medium red shade is are parcels that are within 300 feet from any point of those two rectangular areas, and the lightest red area is if even the tiniest portion of their property touches the 300-foot radius, that parcel got a notice also.
Okay.
That's helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Appreciate that, Rebecca. Thank you.
Good.
I would say, let's roll forward on this as quickly as we can. I think it's not perfect. It's not big enough. It's not, but it's the best we can do. And I think that trying to do something on this issue is really important. There's a lot of people in town who want to see this happen. I'm one of them. And I think it would just be a great thing for the town because it will be a great community building project. One thing I would add as we move forward on this, I would really want us to figure out what we're going to do about the dog walker issue. I see the dog walkers all the time, and if someone walks in with 10 dogs and just unloads them, that's going to be a problem. And we need to figure out how we're going to control that issue. So I'm sure other dog parks have dealt with this. There's probably a lot we can learn from other dog parks about what the issues are and how we control it. And I know you guys will be looking into that, but that's one in particular that I am really concerned about. Thank you.
And Councilmember Ravazio, I'll just tell you that we do have, within our ordinance, you have to have, I think it's 5 or 6 are the max dogs you can walk at any time. And so we will review that and we'll put our code enforcement officer on that ASAP, and we'll start doing some walks through the park and the region. So,
okay. Thank you.
I'm largely in agreement with exactly what was said by Councilmember Ravazio. Do you think it's possible for us to enforce a little bit better those who let their dogs off leash? And obviously, we allowed dogs in the park who are on leash, and there's some who say, "Oh, my dog's under control," right? And they go without leash. Do you think we could actually regulate the off-leash dogs throughout the park if we had a fenced specific dog run?
Yeah, I think to our retired town manager's comments, I think it could definitely help us reduce that. And we've also talked to Central Marin Police Authority providing some additional funding using cadets to enforce parking, dogs off leash, and as well some of our noise regulations, so we can have a quicker response time. We're not using high dollars hourly rates for officers. I think we need some more help to do some of those patrols, and so I think that's what we're probably, as we enact these ordinances and the fiscal impact, we're going to add an enforcement range. And I think we need to send about $15,000 to Central Marin Police Authority to ask them on a routine basis to start enforcing what we're hearing tonight.
Yeah. Well,
but I think it could help us also consider where you limit dogs in the park and a specific, pushing them to the dog park. So I think there's something to that. We do use those fields, for soccer, as David Steinberg mentioned. So absolutely.
I'm in favor of the dog park. I'm in favor of the opening, essentially between the pet club and the dog park. I think it's good for both. And I am also in favor of moving quickly on it.
Okay. I agree with all those sentiments. I would also, once we get this built, it can be sort of a test bed. Let's seriously look at space over on the east side of town that the town owns or controls, and put up a really big dog run, or a large dog run is a better way to phrase it. So.
Thank you. That's helpful feedback. We'll come back to you.
All right. Good. And can somebody retrieve Sloan?
I'll go get him.
Okay.
Put it next to your house.
Okay. The next item is 6B, discussion and possible direction to staff regarding request from the County of Marin that all fire responsible agencies in the county adopt a resolution by October 31 to authorize the city-town district's participation in a joint exercise of power agreement, JPA, to form the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, authorize the city-town district mayor, presiding officer to execute the JPA, and 3, request the County of Marin to place a parcel tax measure on the March 3rd, 2020 ballot. And this is just an information session to,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So thank you for that overview. This process has been discussed for quite some time, I believe over 9 months at a county level amongst the managers and a working group of the chiefs of police, the fire chiefs within the county. It probably should have been the police chiefs, maybe, got a little. So we had a presentation before the council, and as well as our the Fire Authority Council in the last 2 months. All the member agencies, there's 19 of them within this proposed JPA, are being asked in the month of October to basically review what the county approved. You're being asked two action items: one, to approve the JPA as is, as well as request by resolution that the Board of Supervisors place this on the upcoming ballot in March. So some background. As you know, fire prevention and vegetation management's a big issue. There was a grand jury report on this. San Rafael really initially took the lead per their mayor, and they moved fast to basically put a similar ballot on before the San Rafael voters. As they started to consider it and think about it, I think the direction of the council was, hey, we really need to do this together. It's a county issue. 70 to 80% of our vegetation issues are really an unincorporated county jurisdictions. And so we're only as good as our weakest link. And really, this should be a county initiative. And so a lot of discussions started happening amongst a few elected officials. There was a working group of elected officials. Councilmember Ravazio is part of that, as well as our staff. We formed a working group of fire chiefs and city town managers, as well as the county administrator. And they began to work on what should this look like by a governance model of a JPA, as well as a funding model. And so there was polling done, and then the process took its course. The managers, as of late, have had a series of meetings to really vet and make any changes necessary. And this JPA has been revised multiple times over the course of the last few months. One of the issues for our town and other towns is to have that legal review and analysis. And normally, as you know, when you approve a JPA as a city or town, it's a big deal. And you want to put you want to problem solve as many issues up front as you can. You want to, everything. And we've been through JPAs. We're the godfathers of this one. And so we've done a few. And so this process, moved very quickly, but it's been methodical. There's been some good thought to it, but the issues that were presented of the working group, and I can speak specifically for the manager group, is that you wanted to leave if you had to approve the JPA up front, and as quickly as we're moving, right? Because San Rafael and the county, they want something. They're not going to wait till November. This thing has to go on the ballot soon. So if we're going to go into it together, we have to go down this timeline, and it's expedited. And so what we try to do at the manager level and the chief level was to make the JPA as open-ended as possible to problem solve issues as we go. And so speaking to pensions, to employees, to governance, all those things. And so, but you had to have the model as you talk to like the grand jury, as you talk to taxpayer groups and residents and some of the boards and commissions, getting feedback from the elected officials, you had to have a basic model of what that JPA would look like. So that's before you. The issue is there's a lot of questions still to be had, and you have to, one, have faith in the concept of a JPA, which Marin has many of them, that we're going to be able to work together. And so what your manager took the approach on was if we're going to punt a lot of these decisions and what the JPA is ultimately going to look like, we need to focus on governance. And so as you may recall, if you look at the JPA in the early models, it was regions. So there's 5 regions: San Rafael, Novato, West Marin, the Central Marin, Southern Marin. And you had a number of members from each one of those jurisdictions that added up to the governing board. And then you have an operations committee underneath them, and then you have a working group underneath that. So as we started to get into it, Corte Madera pushed hard to say, okay, if we're going to push these issues later, everyone has to have equal representation. My council and me as a town manager, I'm not delegating my authority in any problem solving when it comes to an important JPA like this. When it comes to unfunded liabilities, how we're going to do staffing, our governance, how we make decisions. So Friday before this item came to the Board of Supervisors, we changed the governance model at the manager level. And the governance model then, we worked hard to really problem solve, to set up the problem solving where it forces everyone to come to the table and problem solve. I'll give you an example. So for the small agencies of these 19 board members, everyone's represented. So everyone has an equal vote on that board, on the board of directors, as well as underneath the operations committee, which will consist of, there's special districts, fire districts, so you'll have the chiefs on there, as well as city and town managers from all jurisdictions. So everyone has an equal vote, whether you're 5,000 population or you're 50,000. But then you also have the second standard on budget items of it has to do with population. And so that protects the bigger agencies. It forces everybody to really come together and problem solve. I believe in that model. I think the governance model has been solved. I think you can always tweak it a little bit, but from just working on JPAs, knowing the politics in this county and how decisions get made, I'm on a number of boards that are pretty large in this county. I was comfortable making sure our voice for Corte Madera is heard at my level as well as your level as council members. So from there on Friday, when I went to the Board of Supervisors, I was comfortable as I could be, knowing that the structure of the JPA was such that we could change it by a vote as we went later. We had the model in place to make decisions. As we started to go through it, and the Board of Supervisors passed that JPA, any board, and that's the issue, you're going to want to make changes to a JPA. You're going to want to have recommendations. You have 19 member agencies, and the county administrator told the Board of Supervisors, listen, if you want this to happen and be part of it, you have to accept this as it is, and you have to trust the governance model that will problem solve and make any changes we need to down the road. This has been left open-ended, so it allows us opportunity in our decision-making process. Following that meeting, we had a county managers meeting, and there was some healthy discussion about certain points. Mainly the Southern Marin Agency started to bring up concerns. Sunset. There's a big issue, and members of COST have really brought this up with us on our sales tax measure and all measures of like, look, you have to have a sunset. Anything over 10 years, we have issues with. This is until repealed by the voters. And so that's one, and the Southern Marin agencies and some others have had questions about it and concerns. That is one that I feel, from what I hear, isn't going to be changed. If we're going to move forward, it's going to be until repealed by the taxpayers. One of the reasons is within the polling that they did, it actually raised, in a lot of areas, it raised the yes vote by 8 to 10%. And so
To not have a sunset.
To not have a sunset in the B. And so, we as a board haven't looked at that exact wording of the survey, and we haven't analyzed that ourselves, but that's the conversation amongst our group. The other points, and I think they're important, and I'm going to hand these out, and I can give them to the community as well. You have 3 documents. So some of these documents have been distributed over recent days. Again, the managers delegated this process to our working group of city town managers and the county administrator, as well as chiefs. So the Southern Marin agencies focused on 2 things, and one of them, again, it goes back to budget. And so you can see a red line version. Teresa Stricker, our town attorney, helped the Southern Marin agencies a little bit to get them to yes. To be comfortable with some of the JPA language, and so this is a recommended amendment to the JPA, and it's the red line version. Does everyone have the red line version? Do you have enough copies? Yes, that's it. And so there's 2 sections. One is specifically if there's a surplus at the end of any year, that money by formula goes back to member agencies, and the other piece is within the 5 districts, and then you have a funding formula. A lot of people asked, within the 5 districts, how much money in taxes is actually generated amongst the districts. And so that's an important piece that really our group hasn't seen I haven't seen it until today. And it's important because it's important when you talk about governance and how money is distributed. So if you think about the 5 districts, you can see where it's generated.
I'm sorry. Do you have one more of those with the matrix on it? Sorry.
Do you have this one?
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Thank you, sorry.
So it's important. So when you think about so the chiefs operationally, and Chief Schertz is here, and he can certainly speak to this. The chiefs are looking at this operationally and going, look, this isn't a jurisdictional issue. I mean, it is. It's a county issue. And so we're going to develop a plan of priorities over the first 3, 5, 10 years, how we're going to attack this thing based on the revenue we're going to generate. And that's important. What some of the member agencies are bringing up now is they're saying, look, okay, if you look at this sheet right here. So if you look how this is structured, you have the 60-20-20, and we've talked about this, right? 60% is the core of the funding, and so we generate approximately $20 million. So if you look at the core, on the bottom, 20% of defensible space evaluations and local wildfire prevention mitigation, those go back specifically to member agencies, either by adding staffing in-house to accomplish what we want, or using the JPA to support us in those evaluations, the abatement process that's so arduous, like simplifying and really helping us. The 20% on the local wildfire prevention mitigation, that's what we're doing now. So that could actually add to what we're doing. So right now it's 350 annually. We would receive approximately 200,000 more annually to that. And so that's a positive. What we're focusing on right now on the chart that I gave you of how the conversation that the managers have had, we're focusing on the 60% specifically to the vegetation management. So approximately $10 million of the 20 is specifically to vegetation management. And what some of the jurisdictions are saying, they're like, look, if you look at that formula on the chart, it's approximately, that 10 million is approximately 2 million per each of those 5 regions. So board, whoever the board is, if this gets passed and the JPA is formed in our first meeting, it starts there with the budget. $2 million approximately would be going specifically to those 5 regions, and then we would have input from the chiefs, the managers, before it got to the board, of our 5-year plan, how we're gonna spend money, but it starts in those regions. The issue that some of the concerns that some of the jurisdictions have, specifically in Southern Marin, they're like, look, we're not tied to West Marin. We have our own tax already going on. We're not on the hillside here. Your priorities the first 3 or 4 years might not even be in our area. That 10 million could be diverted annually somewhere else. And so it's an interesting conversation to make them feel more comfortable about it. It does go to trust. It goes back to partnership. It goes back to JPA and experience. What they're saying and what Teresa helped us do in the red line version is basically saying, look, that 10 million is spread out amongst the 5 regions to start the budget process. The board, by vote, based on the criteria of how the JPA is set up, the board of directors can change that formula. You have the authority to do that, but it starts with the regions, and then you can move from there. And so, like, everybody will have a priority project annually. You won't have to wait 5 years to do a project up on Tamalpais. And so, I'm giving you backstory. What you're being asked right now, all the member agencies starting tomorrow, all the cities and towns are being asked to take this, what's in front of you, and say, look, if you want to be part of this, you have to trust the concept that we put in place with the JPA and the governing board, the governance model and the decision making. We left it open-ended for a reason. We did the best we could. You can't make any changes to the JPA, and you need to ask the board of supervisors, if you want to be part of this, to put it on the ballot. If you choose not to ask the board of supervisors to put it on the ballot, then, and it's a little bit open-ended, but where we kind of landed, and Teresa can jump in, would be basically when they do a county vote, it would be similar to Mira. So this isn't like a individual jurisdictional to Marin County. So all 19 agencies, cities and towns in the fire districts, I think there's 5 of them, they're basically gonna ask the board of supervisors to put this on the ballot, and then it would be a countywide vote. If Corte Madera selected not to be part of this, then our voters would not vote on it and they would not be taxed. So that's what's in play. Talking to the mayor, because the mayor and I have, with Teresa, our council, we all support the concept. I think it's a no-brainer, but the devil's in the details, as you know, and the 11th.
What's a no-brainer?
I think the no-brainer of the thought of attacking from a fire prevention and mitigation standpoint, we need to do this as a county. If we don't, we're weak. We're susceptible in our county. The question, though, is what does that look like and the process? And so the mayor and I and Teresa weren't comfortable coming to you and to ask you, like the other member agencies are, to basically take it or leave it. And we didn't feel it was right. It was the right way. So this is a discussion item. We're the only city having a discussion item up front before we bring this back to you. We had a conference call, Teresa was on it, with the Southern Marin agencies to figure out what would get them to be comfortable to bring this to their councils for a recommendation. It's Mill Valley, Sausalito, Tiburon, and Belvedere. These 2 amendments, we believe, bring them to yes, to bring it at least to their councils.
The 2 red lines.
Yes. The sunset issue, it's something that the county and other jurisdictions, I believe, it's just me, but I believe they will not support that. It's something that if this council feels strongly about it, and I think you'll hear some feedback about it tonight, you can certainly, it's your right to bring back that feedback, but I think we have hours or days if we're gonna hit the deadlines. This has to go to the county in early November, and so if you just look at the process of all the public meetings for the 19 member agencies, we really have minimal time to make changes. And so we felt, even though I could tell you right now there's 12 areas that we would want to change plus, and I think you probably have some too, we have to keep it, if we want to do this, as minimal as possible. And so I just didn't want to set you up for failure or frustration. I wanted to have a discussion. I'll tell you, it's something I support. I feel like the governance model is in place, and I feel like that room can problem solve anything. I have trust in it, but that's me as a manager. You have to, as elected officials, be comfortable in that, and you have to be able to justify it to the community. So I feel like these changes are important because it protects Corte Madera. You can follow the money. How much is generated by our taxpayers? Where is that money going on an annual basis? And what is the control and the matrix to ensure that we have control of Corte Madera? And I'll tell you, based on the 2020 model, on the money going to the regions, it's a huge, huge win, and it's an important one. And that, with that coupled with the governance, I'm feeling more comfortable about this, but I will absolutely tell you, it's rushed. It's rushed for a reason, because it's a priority. We needed to get 19-member agencies. A lot of people want to go faster or slower. It's just the way it works when you're trying to form a JPA. So it's not clean. I recognize it. I wanted you to have some backstory. I'll stop, and I'll happy to answer any questions. I think these documents are important publicly for you to have, so you can take it in between now and the 15th. But what I'll tell you is that if we have a list of 10 amendments to this JPA, the JPA is in jeopardy, and Corte Madera probably will not be part of it. And that's okay. I just want to share with you. And it's not the end of the world. Like, we can always, we're doing a lot right now, and we can always come back and take another swing at this. But full disclosure, that's how your manager, your mayor, and your town attorney feel about this. But it's something that we absolutely support. We want to see it happen, but you need to know the backstory.
Can I ask the town attorney something? Right now, the tax measure would be, we join the JPA goes forward with a tax measure, and so our 9,000 citizens, assuming they all vote, which they their votes would be counted along with San Rafael, Novato, the unincorporated areas. And we could easily find ourselves in the same position as whenever there's a regional ballot issue up, they get Oakland and San Francisco to cram it down to Marin, okay? And so my question is can we do the tax measure, but at the Corte Madera level, where we would then forward the money up? Because as I recall, when Ross Valley Paramedic increased their tax, every jurisdiction voted for that. And so and then they pooled the money up.
I just think from a structural standpoint, you have to follow the mirror model, and you have to do it as a...
I'm sorry, the what model?
The mirror model, where
yeah.
you're as a council, you still may have questions about this, but the question is there enough information? Is it much of a need? Do we have enough information to forward this to the voters to consider on a ballot? We can still change some of the ballot language and problem solve this, but you need to do it as a county. It would be very difficult to do this operationally on an individual jurisdiction by jurisdiction vote. It wouldn't work. I'll tell you what potentially could happen. You could lose like Novato. You could have Novato and Sausalito that are out of it, and you could have everybody else in it. How does that exactly... It's problematic for us, and so the cleanest way really is to do it together on a county level type of vote. And again, I think even to get it there from the manager's process to the councils and boards, it's been a process, and I feel like it's the sunset and these two issues that are redlined here at our level of like where we were stuck at to get this recommendation to everybody.
Is there an opt-out clause so that if after 5 years we can sit there and say, you guys just aren't getting it done, we'll withdraw and tax ourselves, and if necessary, subsidize the open space district so they can finally clean up their brush?
So when it comes to JPAs and getting out of a JPA, and position yourself for success, and also the liabilities, if you were to back out, what would happen with liabilities? Your town attorney has brought that up, and it's a major concern of hers, and it's something we feel like we need to solve up front. The goal of and I know it's not your question, but it's part of that. If you were to sever, then the question is, what do you do with liabilities? And so you're legally bound by CalPERS, at least, to have language in there. And so some of the modeling that's being considered, they don't want to have pensionable positions within this JPA. But the question is, how do you treat employees on a contract level that CalPERS will actually approve in an audit? And how do all those things work? And so you're talking about MSERA. Something else we have to consider with that is the fully burdened rates for jurisdictions. The county in San Rafael, their fully burdened rate for an employee, a firefighter, is about $60,000 to $70,000 more than the fully burdened rate for the town of Corte Madera. And the reason for it is that they add unfunded liabilities for OPEB and retirement into those fully burdened rates. So theoretically, if you were to have a contract employee that was basically being contracted in to the JPA, and if CalPERS allowed it and it was okay, then you would have to understand that we're paying for unfunded liabilities for that contract employee for the county. And so there's a lot of issues that have been kind of pushed forward to the formation for down the road with the governance model, with the board, with the operations committee. There are huge concerns of what do you do if you back out? And right now it's a little bit unclear, and I don't think you can, what they did in the JPA, they spoke to, is there a sunset? There's not a sunset. What do you do if you were to just end the JPA? And so the board has the authority to, on a year-to-year basis, evaluate the tax. They can lower the tax at any point. And so really the mechanism that would be used is that what you would do. You would just end the tax at the board level and you would sever. But can an individual agency back out? Right now it's a little bit unclear.
So the individual agency could back out of the JPA, but the way that the tax measure is contemplated, that the tax would continue until it is repealed by the voters. And so if a particular agency, if the measure passes, then all of the properties within each of the member agencies would be taxed going forward. And the only way that would stop is if it's repealed by the voters at some point in time in the future, or the board of the JPA chooses to impose the tax at zero, which it could do.
Go ahead.
Neither of the redlined language appear to provide a sunset provision.
This doesn't address sunset.
So the sunset, so there are 3 points that Southern Marin brought up, and so the third one was the sunset. Amongst the county
Yes.
and some of the larger agencies, that conversation was really, I'll just say, dead on arrival.
No, I get that.
Yeah,
I
so
thought
we
you'd
left
said when
it
you
out.
handed this out that this would solve that or something.
So the Southern Marin agencies at the manager level, I'm not talking about the council level because they haven't gone, but at the manager level, getting 2 of the 3, they felt comfortable enough to move this thing forward to discussion and a recommendation
I see,
to the
despite
councils.
the absence of a sunset.
Yeah, and they weren't
Okay,
happy
I
about
understand.
it.
No, I get
It's a
it.
big one, but again, I think it goes back to the core group of when you look at polling, 8 to 10 points matter, and I think there's a strong contingent amongst the managers group, the working group, that it's kind of not one that they're gonna change at this point. And so I think if you're going to amend any, and I don't know, and I'm going to say this again, this happened 3 hours ago before our meeting. I don't even know that in the working group, I'll tell you the core, it's Matthew Heimel, the county administrator, it's Dan Schwartz in Larkspur, it's Joe Chin and Ross, it's Jim Schutz in San Rafael, and then you have Jim McCann in Mill Valley, and you have Chief Tubbs in Southern Marin. And so that's the working group. I'll tell you Chief Tubbs and Jim McCann and Jason Weber, the county chief. But two of those working group members were on that phone call in Southern Marin today having concerns about what we're talking about. And that really, it put me on my heels a little bit because that was a working group over the last 9 months. So we're not going to be able to make amendments that you may want to consider and you're going to maybe hear tonight from the community. This is one that I think the best case scenario come next council meeting will be those 2 amendments are in there, and I don't know that they will be, but I think you're going to have a fractured JPA from the start if you don't, and you're going to be asked to approve it as is with those amendments. That's the best case scenario. And so that's kind of where we're at. Again, I think it's, from my standpoint, the governance model is very important to me, and understanding, there's a lot of work to be done. And I'm just a little bit concerned that our town attorney, who's very good at JPAs and protecting us, has highlighted some big deals. And one of the things that Teresa brought up was, why do we have to approve the JPA right now? Like, let's spend some more time on it. That we can push this to the voters, make sure the ballot language is really clear what we're talking about, and then really work on this as we move forward. We still have time. And I think from the county standpoint and the working group standpoint, what they heard from this process was, look, you have to have a plan. What is your plan? A big one was this. What's your funding model? How are you going to spend it? I support this. I'll tell you that this is well thought out. With those amendments, I think this is, and the chief can jump in here, I think this is strong. It's a good starting point for us. The governance model is strong.
But the tax measure has problems.
The tax
measure, actually, Todd and I spoke with the county yesterday, and the tax measure, there is some room for modifications and strengthening, and some of the discussion yesterday were about some things to make it stronger. It doesn't change the fundamental concept behind it at all, but to make it stronger.
Let me read you a sentence. The change in the consumer price index shall be calculated from February of the immediate preceding year to February of the current year, or 1.03, whichever is less. But I'm hearing that we're going to cap it at 3%, but the only number shown here is 1.03. Whoever drafted this should have put in a complete calculation or written it in as 3%.
So one thing we can do that's important about the ballot language and the tax measure itself, so when we if we were to approve the resolution asking the Board of Supervisors to put this on the ballot, we then, within that resolution, can do a series of bullet-pointed amendments that we wish to make to the ballot language or our concerns. And what will happen is the working group then will come back together to make those changes.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, thank you, Teresa, what did you mean by the language could be stronger? Do you mean clearer or more? What do you mean by that word?
More clear.
In other words, in your view, it's a little unclear.
I think that just from a drafting standpoint, I think that this is not a final draft, and there are a couple of minor tweaks that appear to be minor but really are fairly significant and were intended all along. I think buttoning up what the purposes are that the money can be used for, making it really clear to the voters will probably be an important way to strengthen it and improve success. There are a couple of other things that I would put in that same category. They don't change the fundamental concept behind the tax measure at all. It's just more from a drafting standpoint, making it very clear to the voters, and that it can be done.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Public comments? Line up. 3 minutes. What?
Looks like it's working. Good. Peter Orth, 1200 Meadowcrest Drive. There are more things than I'm going to be able to cover in my time, and I've changed some of the things I wanted to say right now. But I did want to say that I worked for the feds for a long time. Did a lot of interagency agreements between agencies that needed to work together in areas to do things. And I understand the complexities, and I understand that Todd's saying, trust us. Unfortunately, in this county, there's not much of a record of trust when it comes to doing things about our whole county. A number of examples of that, unfortunately, are the need to go to legal proceedings in order to get them to conform with existing law in a lot of places. And then they ignore those and appeal those. So the trust at the county level is not there. We hope we have it in some extent because we can talk face-to-face here locally. But we are being asked to do a rush to judgment on something that's an incomplete draft, according to our attorney, and to trust them. And I don't see a strategy in any of the documents I reviewed. I see some listing of some individual projects, which are the ones that most people go after, the usual suspects. There's been work in Marin County for decades by the foresters and the people about fire vectors, where fires are going to originate, what they're going to affect. There have been plans for Mount Tam about those kinds of things for a long, long time. They've never been implemented. The counties had some responsibility for that. But the big players in this are not our individual entities. It's PG&E, MMWD, county open space, state parks, federal parks. That's where a lot of our fire interface problems exist. This whole document doesn't address anything about those, how they're going to interact with them at all. One of the poorest things that local governments do is go out of their way to work with somebody else, PG&E being an example. To get open space in county to work with PG&E, you have to tell them, this is what PG&E will do, here's the phone number, and they never call it. So all these unanswered questions, I don't see where the expertise is going to come from to make this a workable situation. All I see is a continuation and emphasis on the current mantra of defend your space. I don't see anything that really addresses, let's go after prevention and control of our whole environmental situation. And this is a way to start approaching that. The 5 districts don't make any sense. They should be focused on the fire vectors. Thank you.
Bob Bundy, Golden Hind Passage. I agree with everything Peter said. And in addition to that, this whole concept of a JPA to corral the 19 individual agencies to create a fire plan because they're not able to do it individually just really doesn't make sense to me. Corte Madera just got through passing a sales tax that is supposed to be used for flood protection, fire protection, disaster preparedness, as well as other infrastructure issues. And we eliminated a parcel tax on the argument that the sales tax was going to bring in more money, and it was not going to impact the residents of Corte Madera as much because it was a sales tax that affected all of the people buying things in Corte Madera. So I have some real concerns about this. Listening to Chief Weber present this as a way to resolve the problems of 19 individual fire agencies, I think we should do what Corte Madera has been doing, which is work on continuing consolidation within fire and police departments rather than creating additional JPAs. I believe that if the Corte Madera Larkspur Fire Department was consolidated with Ross Valley Fire Department, where we would have some savings from the paramedic costs that we now pay for the county. We would eliminate that Ross Valley paramedic JPA. We would have a the total Ross Valley Fire JPA. I think the cost savings that we would get from that would allow us to do a lot of fire protection, a lot of defensible space, a lot of looking at where we need to put money locally. So, and I think this should be something that should happen throughout Marin. These small fire agencies should look at consolidating so that you have some cost savings by doing that. And, you know, potentially if we ended up in the future with just perhaps, 3 fire agencies, San Rafael, Novato, and everybody else, that would probably make more sense than what we've got right now. So I'm not really in favor of this, of going to the town of Corte Madera, the residents of Corte Madera, to create another parcel tax.
Jim Robinson, Ash Avenue, Corte Madera. Excuse me. I concur with the first 2 speakers, so it might make some of my comments somewhat a moot point, but I recognize that there's a need, and I support some reliable method of trying to deal with the issues that we're trying to deal with. One comment I would make is, according to the voter opinion survey, a majority of the residents of San Rafael and Southern Marin supported a flat parcel tax, not a per square foot tax. I know that most of the staff, the council's probably aware of that. I don't know what the audience is, but I concur with that opinion. An assessment on square footage alone is not really equitable and doesn't really recognize the unique features of properties throughout the county. Also recognizing that most of the areas that have needs are state parks, county parks, and even our own municipal properties. I also am concerned about the lack of a sunset clause. I fought that, both sides of that in my profession, but it's been my experience that the most successful incentive for local government that will ensure that revenues will be collected and utilized for critical projects in a timely manner is a deadline or the potential threat of the loss of revenues. And I'm a great procrastinator, and I always found the potential loss of revenues what got us going, got projects done. So I'm just a admission of guilt on my part. I received my property tax bill today. All of yours is similar. The amounts will vary. We've had some recent parcel taxes. Dr. Bundy alluded to some of them. We had the Marin Emergency Radio Authority, $29, SF Bay Restoration Authority, $12, and the Twin Cities Police Facility, which was absolutely needed at $109. I still haven't figured out what it's going to cost me if this tax is approved. I'm told that it's based on 10 cents a square foot. My house is 1,734 square feet, so that's about $173 a year. And again, this would be the largest single parcel tax that's been imposed on my property in the last 22 years. Also, I asked the question, I know that I appreciate, I got an email back from our town manager close to 5 o'clock, so I know he's working 24/7. But there still seems to be an issue of whether or not this tax would include the garage. Now, when I look at my own tax, my own property, and my own legal description, it says 1,734 square feet. If we add in the garage square feet, and Bob can correct me if I'm wrong, excuse me, Councilman Rapazio, he can correct me if I'm wrong, but my garage is probably between 300 and 400 square feet of space. In addition, I live in a standard Matgira Gardens home. So that would bring my property tax increase to about $213 a year. And I realize that's not a significant amount, but it is a significant amount based on what we're paying on other property taxes. And I do have some concerns. I've seen some concerns I have, and the Marin IJ is pointing them out relative to the Marin Emergency Radio Authority, which is a JPA, and I'm told that they're 3 years behind in their schedule. So I know that there's successes, there's failures, and there's also some foot dragging. But I really believe that we need to look at what is the cost. I haven't heard that in the 2 meetings I've been to. The only last comment I'd make is that we've had workshops on junior second units. We've had workshops on the new town hall. I consider this issue much more important than those two. And I know we don't have the time, but I really think this is something that would have been good to have at a one-time item so that the public could come here. A number of people had to leave because we were so late, but appreciate all you do and hope you continue to do what you are doing. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mimi Willard from the Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers. And we have been working with the county on this since June, and they have been very welcoming of our input. And we started with the idea that we wanted to be able to support the development of a county-wide approach to fire preparedness. But this is looking now really rushed. And the perpetual is a big deal because you're getting a novel concept, a JPA whose structure is changing by the day and has the opportunity also to change itself from within. It's a leap of faith. And we can't even begin to think of all the things that can go wrong, but we certainly saw a blow up in Mill Valley recently about people weren't happy about how things were unfolding. Once you're in, you're in. The town of Corte Madera can't get out. The voters can't vote to get themselves out. we're never going to be able to get enough signatures to put it on the ballot to repeal it. And renewal is really important because that's the democratic opportunity to force an adjustment, or you don't actually even really have to force it. When an agency comes back for renewal, they know the things that they have to do to make the citizenry happy. And so it becomes part of a self-adjusting process. I think if there is a tax measure and a JPA that happen, that it will go forward, and it will be perpetual, and it will be important to have that opportunity for adjustment. Finally, I would say this polling, it was scanty, it was flawed, it was perplexing, and it just, I mean, if you ask yourselves, would people, if they really understood the questions, vote to have a tax that goes forever over a tax that goes for a certain period of time? It just doesn't make any sense. I think perpetual is there as a convenience to the agencies. Finally, I would say that the way that I look at this is that all of the negotiation happened among the different agencies and managers. It never really included the population, and so the structure that you get is one that worked out all of the negotiations among the people who are at the table, but we voters are not at the table.
Hi, Carl Spursum, Lakeside Drive, Corte Madera. I agree with what Mimi said. Mimi, I commend her and her group for doing amazing work, evaluating tax initiatives, coming forth with intelligent, mature responses, not always in disagreement. I guess I would want to reinforce what Todd and I have talked about before, this fully burdened rate on members in the JPA and such is a really big deal, because I think we get taken advantage of. Todd's done a great job. Our town's made great strides through reducing our pension obligations, and I'm worried that others will look at this as a way to dump that off on towns like ourselves. I think this survey has to be looked at. There's no way anybody could look at that and say, oh, I'm in favor of perpetual and not 10 years. The questioning, I would really like to see what that survey said. And then I think the fire department consolidation Bob brought up is very important. There's a lot of money spent on a lot of different fire districts around the county. And I think that could provide a lot of opportunity for cost savings on that front. And MMWD, I don't know where they are in this conversation, but they are incapable of handling their vegetation management. They're completely incapable of it. They don't have the resources. And I just wonder how much of that burden is going to fall on us if they decide we can't do it, but it's close to those homes, even though it's MMWD. You guys got to take care of it. I just don't know where MMWD comes in on this and where their resources might actually become part of this. Maybe they are. I'm not aware. So I'll leave it there. It's been a long night. Thanks for all your work, guys.
Marla Orth from Meadowcrest. I'm speaking as a private citizen, but all of you know I am very passionate about vegetation management. I've kind of lived and breathed this for the last year. And a couple comments. One is I am very concerned about how rushed this is. I am in total support for a strategy, but I can't even get our neighbors to Mill Valley or Larkspur to work with us. I really question how we're going to get everybody to really work together to affect what we've been able to do in a very cost-effective, very efficient manner. Our ROI on our effort is infinitesimally small by comparison to what's being proposed with this giant bureaucracy. And I also worry about why we are rushing this. Yes, it's important, but why can't we step back and answer some of these very critical questions? I mean, having been a federal former regulator and a CEO most of my professional career, this doesn't meet my sniff test. And I just encourage us to step back and really think thoughtfully of whether this is something we really want to be doing right now without these modifications and without these concerns being addressed. Thanks.
other questions?
Just,
Todd,
Mr. Mayor,
comments?
members of the council, just really quickly, there's a question about MMWD. MMWD is not a member of this JPA. However, as you may recall, in their recent fee hike, they're responsible, or they promised the voters that they would put a portion of that money towards vegetation management. County Marin's negotiating with them now, working on a formula. MMWD would be required per this, our countywide ordinance. They could be abated, they would be held accountable for vegetation management. But again, the funding model and writing of what that contract agreement looks like has not been done yet, but it's in the works. And so it's another piece that is being worked on, but it's not in writing today.
For the comments, I guess where I am is I'd be very comfortable asking the citizens of Corte Madera to vote for a Corte Madera tax that mirrored what the county wants. And when we get the JPA organized, roll that tax into the JPA. But I was sitting up here when CAM came to ask us to extend their tax. And they told us 2 reasons we should do it. We'd get more crossing guards, and we'd get school bus money. Well, we haven't, the Reed School District hasn't gotten any bus money, and we lost our 1 crossing guard. And then in terms of whether they can whether the county as an organization can effectively get stuff done, when I started working for Fireman's Fund back in the mid-'80s, okay, the Bottle Narrows was a bottleneck. It's still a bottleneck. So I'm very hesitant to sort of cede authority, taxing decision-making to a county entity, because I'm not certain if our county government is capable of managing a JPA efficiently and effectively.
Wouldn't it be us who are managing this?
No.
It's all the members. It's all the members.
We're going to be outvoted. Okay? And if we don't sort of get it set up right initially, it will be broken from then on out, and we can't bail out and go our own way.
May I?
Go ahead.
I'm struggling. First of all, thank each of those who've made comments. I think they're very useful comments, and I particularly congratulate Ms. Willard for having had many conversations starting in, I think she said June, with the group that's been formulating this, proving that there is citizen involvement in making this happen. I know that the environmental organizations who put forward several comments, those have been reflected in this latest draft. But what I'm struggling with is, on the one hand, we all are experiencing 2 things. One is we're not getting the cooperation, let's say, over the hill with the next jurisdiction that we should have. But at the same time, everybody acknowledges that, wildfire knows no boundaries. And so how do we actually get that cooperation with the folks on the other side of the hill, or on the other side of the boundary line, or the other agencies that have responsibilities, unless we say, we got to make this everybody's job and give the authority for everybody to work on these types of vegetation management, fire mitigation, public education, creating defensible space, improving building codes. I think it was Councilmember Ravazio last time who actually asked the fire department, maybe it was asking Ruben, did you have any funding or authority to work on the things that you're doing prior to this and the grants that we've won? And the answer was no. So we're trying to give ourselves the authority to do what's necessary to break down barriers, work together on managing this giant threat and issue. So I guess I congratulate the team that's been putting in many, many, many hours on this. And I don't know how to solve the problem of bringing groups together unless we do it with some form of JPA. I really don't. And I guess to my friend Bob Bundy's concern of consolidation, absolutely. You know, for the last 6 years, I've been with you, 8 years, I've been with you on consolidation of our fire departments locally. But it's taken that whole time to get that consolidation done. Don't we need action sooner? And would this in any way stand in the way of consolidation? I don't think so. I think if you had a JPA, it's now required to work together, both on the policy level and on the staff level, on these issues, you'd see more opportunities for consolidation and working it out together, I think. Where am I wrong in this thinking, in this line of thinking?
Why do we have to do March 20th? March 2020?
Again, some of it started with the background with San Rafael. And so if San Rafael is going to go the countywide measure and not go alone,
Right.
that was a really early on demand because they were a little bit ahead of the game of the other jurisdictions. I mean, we all did our own thing. Southern Marin, Corte Madera did something locally, but San Rafael was going to do something in order. In those negotiations between the county and some other jurisdictions with San Rafael, the agreement was if we're going to be part of this, we don't want to wait another fire season. We're going to do something now, and so that's why. And so if we're going to have San Rafael, and if we're going to do something as a county, you have to have San Rafael.
Right.
We need to have San Rafael, and so that's why. I'm not saying I agree. You know, that's just where we're at, and so.
So they could go ahead and pass the same tax, but at the San Rafael level. And we could also pass it at the Corte Madera. Archer could do the same.
I think you could do anything. I'll just tell you that it won't work. That model will not work. And not to say that we can't wait and do this at a later time. I mean, if that's the way we have to, we have to. But I'll just tell you, if you're going to have individual agencies, everybody has different funding models. It's too complex. There are too many. Just being in that room, there are too many hurdles. I'm just telling you, it's not going to happen, and your staff is not going to spend the time to try to get there. It would be incredible the lift that would have to take place. So, I think we do this as a county, or you do it regionally. I'll just tell you that, and I think that's what the chief's about to say, and I'll turn it over to him. This knows no boundaries. You do this as a county, or you just pressure everyone to take care of their own house. The problem is 70% of the issue is not in the cities and towns. It's outside and unincorporated. It's MMWD. It's what the speaker said. It's what the council's saying. You have to the only way to speak to that is to do something similar to this. The question, though, is
how much subsidy are we going to have to?
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Mayor. We need to take a vote whether we want to continue the meeting.
Okay.
I would move that we continue by 30 minutes till 10.
So I will, as is my habit, for those of you who've seen my impatience in the past, I will second the motion, but let me caution you, I don't see that happening a second time. That's my own thing.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm with you.
All right. Go ahead.
So we got he's been a motion and a second on the table.
Councilmember Bailey?
Yes.
Councilmember Kuhnhart?
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Beckman? Mayor Andrews?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
and the chief wants to say something.
I just would like to add to the concept or the notion that we could perhaps be more effective doing our own thing or asking the individual agencies to do their own thing. I do not want to indicate in any way that everything that we have done and everything that we may do in the future is useless or pointless or ineffective. It is not. We've made great strides in the last couple of years in our preparedness and our wildfire protection. But what we would do individually as a single entity or agency or town would, in my opinion, pale in comparison in effectiveness, overall regional effectiveness, and fires are a regional issue, not a local issue. it would not even come close to what we may be able to accomplish under what's being proposed. This is not by any means a perfect plan or solution, but especially after the changes to governance were made, many of the people with initial concerns, especially the smaller agencies and smaller districts that had significant concerns about being outvoted or bullied based on project priorities and funding, were satisfied because of the unique nature of what was developed for the voting under this organization. Every agency will get a vote, but they will also have population as one of the metrics to affect the power of the votes. And so really it does kind of follow that House and Senate idea that everyone's getting a voice, but no one can really be bullied. And what it lends itself to is the necessary building of consensus. And again, I'll just reiterate, it's not perfect, but many of us are much more comfortable now knowing that, just as a specific example, you know, the fear that all the money is going to get used in the north end of the county and none of us smaller districts are going to see any of this, it just can't, it wouldn't happen because there are so many voices in this part of the county that could block something like that from happening through their vote. So, and just very briefly on the concept of trust, yes, I know that trust can be a difficult thing to ask elected officials to entertain because of what we've seen in the past in a bunch of different areas. But I just wanted to make sure that we're talking about the same definition of trust. And I'm not in any way trusting the county to make this all work for all of us. I'm trusting the governance model that's being established here, and that is not the county of Marin. That is voices from every single agency. And so I feel much more trustful of that process than simply thinking that this is going to be a county-run agency. It's not. It's a JPA. It's a collective voice agency.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Just a quick question. So Todd, I got a question for you about the JPA. Are you confident? I think that the JPA is structured well and will work, because I've worked with you on a number of JPAs, and I trust your judgment on how this stuff works better than anybody. I think you're the smartest person in the room on this kind of stuff, so I hate to put you on the spot here, but
I think there's a lot of work to be done on the JPA, but I feel like our representation, again, what the chief said on the governance model and us being able to get in the room and knowing the political structure to get to yes and who has the actual control on that decision, I feel it sways the Corte Madera in today's environment. I can't speak from 10 years from now. I'm comfortable getting there from the JPA model. I do agree with Teresa, and it's one thing, just about process. I do think we should push a little bit of like, why approve the JPA today? Why enter a JPA today? Like, it's a document that can be there for the voters to look at and understand with background of what we're working towards, but why do we have to approve it? We should be able to ask them to put it on the ballot, and we should focus on cleaning up ballot language, you know, and come back to the JPA, continue to work on the JPA. I feel like that's something we should be able to do. I don't know if that'll fly as part of process. To your question too, strategically, we use this as a discussion. So we're the first city or town to have this discussion, and everyone's going to look at this video tonight, and then they're going to change from an action item at the next meeting this week and next week and probably have a discussion. And we're going to see where everybody else.
We're screwing it up.
We're gonna kind of see where everybody goes with this a little bit, and when we come back on the 15th or 16th, based on your feedback to me tonight, which I have an idea of what it might be, then we're going to be better positioned to say what's happened. And so this is, I think there's a lot of concerns, but I do, and I guess I don't know what word you use for it, but I feel like we can get this JPA where it needs to go. As an example, I'll just tell you from the county, from the attorney standpoint of everybody in the county, they're deferring a lot. They want Teresa as part of that that team because of their history and what they're good at. And so we're going to have strong representation on there, but there's a lot of work to be done. And I just want to make that really clear. But I
Okay.
think we can get there.
So I've been the town's representative on this countywide effort, so I've been at all the meetings. And first off, thank you to the public for all your input on this. It's really been helpful, and I really appreciate it. And we need to figure this out and make this work. We need to do something on a county level. That is one thing I am completely convinced of. We got to do something. This is starting to affect individual homeowners on a really difficult basis. I see this in my line of work. I got people who can't get fire insurance. They're being told they're going to pay $10,000 a year from Lloyd's of London in order to get fire insurance on their home. Okay, we've got to do something, and we need to do it as a county. And this may not be perfect. We need to get it as good as it can be, but we need to do something, and we need to do something soon because it's not going to get any better. We're having a really cold fall for some reason, who knows why, and I think we're very lucky because of that. But, you know, it could easily change, and we could have a very difficult situation. I hear your points about continuing consolidation with other fire agencies, but consolidation is really hard. I met with one of our council members and two of the Larkspur council members 7 years ago or 8 years ago to say, let's consolidate our fire departments. And it took us 7 years in order to get that done. And we wanted to do it. We really wanted to make it happen. But there were so many things that had to be worked out. It made it difficult. So you've got all these fire agencies, and I agree, consolidation would be great, but a lot of them don't even want to consolidate. So to try to get them to consolidate and make that happen, I just don't see that as something that's reasonable that's going to work. And I don't know how you force that and make that happen, because I've been in the rooms with representatives from all these fire agencies for the past 7 or 8 months. And, you know, they're all different, and they all have opinions about how, you know, they should run. And I think, you know, they like their independence. And that's one of the things this JPA is trying to solve. So I think we need to figure this out somehow and make it work. We need to move forward. And Todd, as I said, I've worked with you on a number of JPAs over the years, and I would rely on your and Teresa's direction as to how we do this in a way that can make it work and solve some of the issues that have been brought up here tonight. But I think it's important that we do something and we move forward on a county level in some way, because this problem is too big for us to try to handle alone, on our own. It's just not going to happen. And our fire departments, that's one of the other things I've learned throughout this process. It keeps coming up. Our fire departments are set up to save lives, put out fires in houses. They are not set up to solve this problem. It's not what they're designed to do. It's not what their personnel is set up to do. And this is set up to solve a different problem, and we need to do it. So I'm not sure how we get there, but I'm willing to support whatever we need to do to figure out how to get something that is acceptable for us and for the taxpayers, because it's just too big of an issue not to. We got to do something here. We can't just sit here and not do anything. We got to do something. I think the only way to solve it, you're absolutely right, Chief Schurz, is we got to do it on a county level. It's got to happen. We have to figure out something that makes it work. Those are my comments.
Okay.
Can I ask,
Yeah.
Mayor Andrews, can I ask, how would it work for us to go it alone when we're already part of the Central Marin Fire Department?
I guess really.
Wouldn't we only be able to act together with Larkspur, for example? I'm sorry, but I just.
I guess my chief concern in setting up this JPA is that we get it built, everybody says, oh, that will take care of fire prevention, and it's ineffective. But we can't get out and try an alternative because we're locked into this JPA. And, you know, I've had, you go out Ross Valley, they've had a flood control tax since roughly the '82 flood. Okay, they're still flooding. They're still arguing about how to fix the flooding problem. Okay, we were able to come up with a plan, spend $30 million to implement it. We're going to spend another $50 million going forward, and Yeah, it's sort of, if we had been tied into the Ross Valley Flood Control District, we'd still be swimming every winter. And I guess that's my concern, is just giving up control before we know how we're going to be effective. And that's, where I'm saying, okay, if San Rafael insists that the tax has to be passed in March, okay, we'll pass it at the Corte Madera level or the Larkspur level and start collecting the money and then merge into the JPA once we figure out what it plans to do over the next 5 years, okay? Because right now it's sort of like, oh yeah, we'll set it up and then we'll sort it out. And anyway, that's where I come out. Son?
So, I don't frankly know how I'd vote if we were voting tonight. I'm glad we're not. But I want to tell you what the concerns are that I'm going to be thinking about. What's the magic date? We vote October 15th?
31st.
Okay. No, what's the date that we are going to consider this? 15th. The 15th. All right. So I just wanted to be as quick as I can, guys. I come from this knowing, as we all do, about the potential catastrophe that we are currently living under. I don't want our decision-making to be motivated by fear, but I'm afraid. Because Sonoma and Napa in the immediate past went through disaster land. Okay, so lives and properties, terrible, and we're being asked that we should do something to ameliorate that. Okay, so far so good. Secondly, we all kind of agree, I think, and Scott, you tell me, I think it's probably unanimous from my observation of the fire chiefs, unanimously think we ought to have a giant fire department. That would just be the most, wouldn't it? I mean, realistically, it's not. I think it's not realistic, but if in a perfect world, wouldn't that be like the best? A giant consolidated Marin fire department that could just, right?
I can't wait to see this. I don't know what he's going to say. I'm excited.
I can only answer for myself. I cannot answer for any of the other fire chiefs. But I think that would be the most efficient use of resources.
Okay. Everybody I know who knows things about this tend to agree with you, I think, almost without hesitation or reservation, except one, which Bob brings up, is that it's not like possible because of politics or the complications of the bureaucracy or something. Okay. So,
It's possible, just not in our lifetime.
okay. So now we have a problem. We have terrible catastrophe looming. We are at the edge of a cliff, and the best solution is just can't realistically happen in time to save lives and property. Okay, and we're going to be asked to make a decision about this thing like next week or 2 weeks from now. So here, let me tell you some things that sound good. They're the reasons why maybe we should consider it. There's a grand jury report. They say do this thing. They spent all kinds of time thinking about this. They're smart people. They're dedicated. They're constitutionally mandated to figure this out. They say so. The chiefs agree. Scott's opinion is, it's hard to overstate how important what Scott says is to me. And frankly, Jason, for that matter. We entrust our lives. Scott thinks it's a good idea. I don't know. That means something. Genuinely, that matters. Todd thinks it's a good idea. Todd is the best. He tends to know these things. That matters. Bob thinks it's a good idea. Bob has sat as our voice and listening and seeing on the relative committees of this, so that matters. My own experience on joint powers authorities differs a little bit from what my observation of the county as a whole is. I sit on two, Marin Clean Energy and the Ross Valley Paramedic Authority. Those two are efficient and have been run famously despite all kinds of imbalances for a variety of reasons and complications. But I have observed the many examples that we've talked about tonight about the county not treating us particularly well and/or our Corte Madera tax money and other things not being used appropriately for years, again and again and again. So my own experience is a little different from my own observations of what has happened. I sit on these boards. I participate in the decision making. I actually think they're doing a good job. So okay. But then we have some issues here, which are this is a pretty good sheet. This one that isolates the core program areas and so forth, and there's dollar figures out here. I agree wholeheartedly with Teresa's view that there ought to be explicit and specific ballot language that sort of says how money is spent and so forth, that maybe carries some weight. It's not clear to me that we've thought this thing through. So no, I take that back. It's clear we haven't thought it through. We're being asked, though, to take a leap of faith in the people whom we trust, who are professionals and have our best interests at heart. I know this to be true, and they're also smart so they can do well. But to trust that we should sacrifice the uncertainties that we ordinarily would flush this thing and trust instead in their judgment, because if we don't, the catastrophe could result meaning lives and property. I mean, that is a real devil's decision to have to make here. Were it not for the catastrophe that would result beyond doing it, none of us would even think about agreeing to commit ourselves, our town, our people to, in perpetuity, an additional tax that doesn't have a qualified and specific explanation of what's going to happen. On the other hand, shame on us if by failing to act, people lose their lives or their property. Right? I mean, do you not? I don't know. That's my own view of this. I generally am against bureaucracy, but I have seen how it can work, and I sort of acknowledge the grand jury report that if we don't do this, we're just going to perpetuate a problem. It's so easy. What I've observed in the last years here and previously on the Planning Commission, and frankly, any public thing I've ever had, is that it is so much easier to throw a grenade than it is to build something up. And all kinds of people come to our meetings, not, by the way, God bless all of you for coming tonight and saying it's a terrible idea, but again and again and again, we have people come and say it's a terrible idea, it's a terrible idea, it's a terrible idea. They might be a terrible idea, but we have to occasionally do something, even when it's not like the best idea, because if you do nothing, it's even worse than a terrible idea, right? If we all go to hell in a handbasket because we fail to act, to me, that's worse than going to hell in a handbasket because we acted badly. At least we did something. I tell all the people that work for me, if in doubt, be bold. Like, if you don't know, do something, because it's better than doing nothing. So I get concerned, though, that, again, I'm being motivated, despite common sense and, frankly, what my brain is telling me, that my heart is concerned that the failing to act, I'm motivated by the fear that we're going to suffer these terrible consequences. Okay, I'm sorry, guys, we've got 8 minutes and I'm taking too long. Those are my concerns. At the end of the day, as you all know, my political theory is that we should never get bogged down in philosophy. We should always stick to operational concerns. So our operational problem is we have terrible fire danger that has to be addressed on a countywide level. We all know this. The operational problem is, how do we do so? And the solution being presented to us feels pretty bad, guys. I mean, it just feels so uncertain. And the commitment we are making is in perpetuity. In perpetuity.
Or until the voters say no.
So, on the other hand, okay, that's it, guys. Anyway, I've done nothing but expose my, uncertainty. So there you have it.
I think that's it. I think
Could we have 4 or 5 jurisdictions say, let's have a vote?
you're gonna have some movement, and we're gonna have a good understanding of those who have really specifically worked on this measure. Take it to their councils and see how they respond. And so we're gonna have some knowns in 2 weeks. I just wanted to set us up for the background and success.
We appreciate that.
This is what's at stage, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna be able to, and we'll be able to lighten that agenda item, the agenda for that night, and really be thoughtful in this. And just know that your staff is gonna work hard about process and any other options. So this was helpful. Thank you for your feedback, and we will come back to you next meeting.
Can I just say one thing to Sloan? That was super entertaining and valuable. And valuable. But I just, throughout my career since the early 70s, I've always reflected on the best scale, geographic scale of governance is that scale which is appropriate for the problem. If we were going to be locating a regional airport, you need a regional government to solve that problem. If you're going to talk about dog parks, it's our town. If you're talking about solving this issue, it's got to be at least county level. I think. And so that is the
I
appropriate
agree with that,
scale.
but the specific question, we all agree with that. The specific question is not, is that the best way? It's, is this JPA in front of us like the right thing? I don't know. Here's the thing is, guys, just so you know, I am really undecided in this, not just for effect am I dramatically. If you said, if you don't do it today, then it's not going to happen, and consequently, when there's fires next spring, it's on your head. That worries me, so I get concerned. Maybe in the intervening time, Teresa and Scott and Todd can modify the language in a way that gives me a little more warm and fuzzy. It may be unmodifiable in a way that could ever be acceptable. So, as I often say, good luck and God bless.
Can I just, before we break?
Can I ask one thing?
Go ahead.
Before the next meeting, can you give me a better idea of what specific, we've got the 20%, we got another 20%, we got a 60, and then it's going to be, what projects do you hope to accomplish in the next 7 years?
So this whole movement and process was based on the 3 guiding documents that we discussed in the presentation.
Right.
The most important, which from a project standpoint, is the CWPP, the Community Wildfire Protection Plan.
Okay.
It's a county-wide plan that was
Is that
developed.
page 67? We're right, okay.
Well, right. It's thick and hard to read, but the plan is there, and there are plenty of essentially shovel-ready projects that have been developed through voices from every fire agency in the county, prioritizing where the biggest threats are, and lots of science-based fuel modeling and data-driven decisions. So there is a plan. It's not just, when we get the money, we'll figure out what to do with it. We have a plan that'll get us through years of work before we'll need to go beyond that. And then I just wanted to also add, as we are concerned about the perpetuity question, and it sounds like that might end up being a deal breaker for other agencies, I know it would be a heavy lift to be repealed by the voters, but incorporated into this plan now is an official, formal Citizens Oversight Committee that is, specifically laid out by region and by area of specialty or interest. And I just have a feeling that if that committee that's going to be paying very close attention and be involved in at least observing all the deliberations feels like that this is being completely ineffective and money is being wasted, if they raise the flag that that's the case, I don't think it would be that hard to motivate the voters to repeal this. Okay. So there is a little bit of a protection in there from that standpoint, in my mind.
And there's a taxpayer representative who's on that oversight committee and an environmental representative, et cetera. It's not just chiefs and managers.
That's correct.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
We're about to run out of time. Can I ask that we change to the agenda and we go to item 6D before we break?
Okay.
Can I make a motion to that?
To change the agenda and also to extend the time by
15 minutes? Okay.
Yes.
I'll second the motion.
Yeah, extend the time by 15 minutes and make, and we'll just handle item 6D.
Okay. Okay.
This is the motion.
Right, good. Can you stick around afterwards so we can talk? Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Teresa, are you presenting or am I?
I was planning to present. Would you prefer to
go ahead.
present?
Good.
You're on the
Mr.
clock,
Mayor?
Teresa.
Sorry,
Okay.
I didn't mean to throw a curveball at you.
No,
here,
no,
but
no.
away.
That's fine. I was planning to
we
present
should do this
with, but
tonight.
only if that's the pleasure of the mayor.
Go
Yes.
ahead, please
Okay.
do.
So the item before you is an amended contract for your town manager's contract. The town manager currently has a contract that took effect on September 1st, 2016, and currently expires on September 1st, 2021, so in 2 years. The council and the manager have decided to extend the term of the manager's contract, and the item before you is an amendment that would do just that. It would also do a couple of other things. First, it would extend the contract with the manager until the end of 2026. So the extension would be until December 31st, 2026. The town manager's salary has not changed since he began just over 3 years ago. His current base salary is $219,000. He did receive a one-time 5% bonus in May of 2018 and again in February 2019. That was, both of those bonuses were 5% of his base salary, or $10,950. But again, he has not received an increase in his salary since he began service 3 years ago. The proposed amendment would provide for an approximately 5.2% increase in his salary, which would be an additional $11,400 per year, which would bring his annual salary to $230,400, which is $19,200 per month. The proposed increase would take effect retroactively to September 1st, which is his third anniversary date. Based on the March 1st, 2019 compensation survey of Marin County town and city managers, which is provided in your packet, the proposed increase in salary would bring the town manager to be the fourth highest paid town or city manager in Marin County of the 11. So he would be number 4 out of 11. The amended contract would also establish a periodic compensation review. Currently, there is no mandatory process for reviewing the town manager's salary in his current contract. The current contract does provide a requirement that if the other managers received a cost of living increase, if the town manager requests, then the council will take a look at to see whether the town manager should also receive a similar cost of living. The proposed contract does away with that provision and provides for a periodic compensation review that would be required every 2 years. And the first requirement would be 2 years from now. The contract also provides some clarifications as to the timing of the existing annual performance review and evaluation process. Under the contract, both the current contract and the proposed contract, the town manager receives a performance evaluation once a year. This clarifies that process will begin in September or October each year, with the goal of having the process completed no later than in December. There is another change that's made to the proposed contract is that the timing for consideration of a discretionary performance review. The current contract provides that following the annual performance review, the council may, in its sole discretion, grant the manager a performance bonus of up to 5% of his base salary, and as I discussed earlier, he has received 2 of those. The proposed amendment makes clear that this discretionary performance will be considered, if at all, only in those years where there isn't a salary increase. And again, it remains discretionary. There's nothing in the contract that requires you to provide that, even if you do consider it. The contract also deletes, at the request of the town manager, the proposed contract would delete a benefit that is in the existing contract. The existing contract provides that the town will pay up to $10,000 a year annually for professional coaching and mentoring for the town manager. This benefit was included in the original contract in recognition of the fact that the town manager had never served as a town manager previously. The town manager has requested that benefit be deleted, and so the proposed amendment contract does that. There's an additional clarification in the contract. The existing contract provisions did not explicitly reflect the parties' understanding and intent that the town manager receive the same amount of administrative leave as the town department heads may be granted each year. And this was something that I recently discovered as a drafting oversight in that contract. And so it's my recommendation that oversight be corrected and that the amendment provide for what has been happening all along, which is that the town manager will continue to accrue at the beginning of every fiscal year the same amount of administrative leave that the department heads may be granted in that particular year. The contract makes clear that the town manager may use his administrative leave at his discretion, but that it has to be used in the year in which it accrued and cannot be carried forward beyond the end of the fiscal year. And then there are a variety of other clarifications, none of which are change the contract or the situation that it has been for the past 3 years, but there are some cleanup provisions in the contract. In terms of fiscal impact, for the current fiscal year, approval of the amendment would result in an increase in expenditures of $10,268.74 as compared to the adopted budget. This includes the increase to salaries of $9,500, and it includes payroll taxes and the increase in employer CalPERS contributions as well. For 2021, the fiscal impact would be a total of $12,420 in expenditures as compared to the budget adopted. And this includes $11,400 in salaries, and it also includes payroll taxes and the increase for employer CalPERS contributions. And with that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
No questions? Questions? Audience questions? Comments?
Public comment?
Are we done?
Public comments? Council comments?
Yeah, instead of paying for management training, can we get other jurisdictions to pay us when he helps them work out their problems?
I think that might be in the MOU, and I'm sure he'd be very happy to hear about that.
So I'm happy to make the motion that we approve the contract. Is that the correct motion?
So it is your practice to have this come forward for 2 readings. So I would suggest that you make a motion to introduce the resolution.
But before we vote on it, let me just say for benefit of the public that we're not doing this without thought. In private negotiation sessions, we thought carefully about these terms and believe it appropriate under the circumstances. I know, speaking for myself anyway, that my sense is we ended up at a reasonably good place that Todd richly deserves. So that's why I would say would we make a motion to do what?
And it was unanimous. And it was unanimous.
Yes.
So, and I would just remind you that certainly that was a unanimous direction.
Yes.
But this is the approval time because the public certainly has the opportunity to weigh in.
Right.
And we don't happen to have any members of the public here who want to speak on this item. But this is the time that it gets approved. I would suggest, for lack of a better process,
Yes.
that I would suggest a motion to introduce the resolution, which you will then hear back from me at the in 2 weeks.
Okay, I'll move that we introduce the resolution.
Second.
Councilmember Bailey?
Yes.
Councilmember Kuhnhart?
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Beckman? Mayor Andrews?
Yes. And any objections to adjourning?
Please, God. Thank you.
I move we're adjourned.